Alice in Wonderland. Written by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 1. In the Rabbit's Den. Alicia was getting tired of sitting with her sister on the river bank. Having nothing to do, she had glanced a couple of times at the book that her sister was reading, but there were no drawings or dialogues. "And what good is a book without drawings or dialogues?" asked Alicia. So, she was thinking, and thinking took some effort, because the heat of the day had left her sleepy and dazed, if the pleasure of weaving a garland of daisies would compensate for the work of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a pink-eyed white rabbit jumped up to her. There was nothing very extraordinary in this, nor did it seem to Alice very strange to hear the rabbit say to himself, "My God! My God! Alice, I'm going to be late." When he thought about it later, he decided that, of course, he should have surprised her a lot, but at the time he thought it was the most natural thing in the world. But when the rabbit took a pocket watch out of his vest, looked at it, and ran, Alice jumped up, because she suddenly understood that she had never seen a rabbit with a vest, nor with a watch to pull out of it, and burning with curiosity, he ran after the rabbit through the meadow, and arrived just in time to see him rushing into a burrow that opened at the foot of the hedge. A moment later, Alice was also entering the burrow, without stopping to consider how she would manage to get out. At first the rabbit's den stretched in a straight line like a tunnel, and then it twisted sharply down, so sharply that Alice had not even thought to stop and found herself falling into what looked like a very deep well. Either the well was really deep, or she was falling very slowly, because as she went down, Alice had plenty of time to look around and wonder what was going to happen next. First, he tried to look down and see where it would go, but it was all too dark to see anything. Then he looked at the walls of the well and saw that they were covered with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there he saw maps and pictures, hung on nails. He took a jar from the shelves as he walked by. It had a label on it that read, "Orange jam," but saw, disenchanted, that it was empty. He didn't feel right to throw it down, for fear of killing someone who was walking underneath, and managed to leave it on another shelf as it continued down. Wow, thought Alice. After a fall like this, rolling down the stairs will seem to me a little bit unimportant. Alice, how brave they will all find me. I would not even cry, even if I fell off the roof. And it was true. Down, down, down. Would you never just fall? I would like to know how many miles I have already descended, he said aloud. I must be quite close to the center of the earth. Let's see, I think it is 4,000 miles deep. As you see, Alicia had learned some of these things in the classes at school, and although it was not a very opportune time to show off her knowledge, since there was no one there who could hear her, it seemed to repeat it was a rehearse. Yes, it must be the distance. But I wonder what latitude or longitude I will have reached. Alicia had no idea what latitude was, nor what longitude was, but she felt it was okay to say such beautiful and impressive words. It started again. Maybe I'll fall across the whole earth. How fun would it be to go out where these people live, who walk upside down? The unkind, I think. Now Alice was glad that no one was listening, because this word didn't sound right to her. But then I'll have to ask them the name of the country. Please, ma'am, are we in New Zealand or Australia? And as he spoke these words, he rehearsed a reverence. Reverences as he fell through the air. Do you think this is possible? And how ignorant I am going to seem to him. No, better not ask anything. I will see it written somewhere. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, and Alicia immediately started talking again. Dina, I fear, will miss me very much tonight. Dina was the cat. I hope you remember your milk saucer at tea time. Dina, my beauty, I'd like to have you down here with me. There are no mice in the air, of course, but you could hunt some bats, and they look a lot like mice, you know. But I wonder, will the cats eat bats? At this point, Alicia began to feel half asleep and continued to say as in a dream, Do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats? Because he could not answer either question, it did not matter which one of the two was asked. He was really asleep and began to dream that he walked with Dina by the hand and asked her anxiously, Now Dina, tell me the truth, have you ever eaten a bat? When suddenly, Cataplum. went to fall on a pile of dry branches and leaves. The fall was over. Alicia was unhurt, and she jumped up. She looked up, but it was dark. Before her another long passage opened, and she reached to see the white rabbit in it, who was running away. There was no time to lose, and Alice, without hesitation, ran like the wind, and I came just in time to hear him say, as he bent a bend, "Bless my ears and mustaches, what a late day it is." He was almost on his heels, but when he turned back, he saw the rabbit nowhere. He was found in a wide and low hall, lit by a row of lamps hanging from the ceiling. There were doors around the whole hall, but all of them were locked, and when Alice had turned around, going down one side and up the other, trying door to door, she went sadly into the center of the room, and wondered how he would manage to get out of there. Suddenly he found himself in front of a three-legged table, all solid glass. There was nothing about it, except a tiny golden key, and the first thing that occurred to Alicia was that it must correspond to one of the doors in the lobby. But, alas! Either the locks were too big, or the key was too small, it could not open any door. However, when he turned around for the second time, he discovered a curtain that he had never seen before, and behind it was a small door about 2 feet high. He tried the golden key in the lock, and saw with joy that it fitted well. Alice opened the door and found it leading into a narrow passage, no wider than a mousetrap. He knelt down and across the hall saw the most wonderful garden you can imagine. How I wanted to leave that dark room and walk among those colorful flower beds and fresh fountains. But I couldn't even get my head through the opening. And though I could pass my head, thought poor Alice, I would soon be served without my shoulders. How I wish I could shrink like a telescope. I think I could, if I knew where to start. And as you see, so many extraordinary things had happened to Alicia that day, that she had begun to think that almost nothing was actually impossible. There was no point in waiting by the little door, so he returned to the table, almost hoping to find another key on it, or at least an instruction book to shrink people like telescopes. This time he found a small bottle on the table, which was certainly not here before, said Alice, and around the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the word "beam" beautifully printed in large letters. It's all very well to say "drink me," but little Alice was very prudent, and she wasn't going to drink that just like that. "No, I will first look," he said, "to see whether or not it carries the indication of poison." Because Alice had read precious tales of children who had been burned, or had been devoured by fierce beasts, or other unpleasant things, only for not wanting to remember the simple rules that people seeking their good had instilled in them, like a red iron burns you if you don't let go of it right away, or that if you cut yourself too deep in a finger with a knife, blood usually comes out. And Alicia never forgot that if you drink too much of a bottle with the word poison it will end up, in short or in long, hurting you. However, that bottle did not bear the indication poison, so Alicia dared to taste the contents, and finding it very pleasant, he had, in fact, a mixture of flavors of cherry pie, syrup, pineapple, roasted turkey, caramel and hot toast with butter. He finished it in a jiffy. "What a strange feeling," said Alicia Dash. "I must be shrinking like a telescope." And so it was, indeed. He now measured only 25 centimeters, and his face shone with joy at the thought that he had the right size to pass through the little door and enter into the wonderful garden. First, however, she waited a few minutes to see if it was still shrinking in size, and this possibility made her a little nervous. "Don't go consume me completely, like a candle," he said to himself. "What would become of me then?" He tried to imagine what happened to the flame of a candle, when the candle was out, for he could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, seeing that nothing else was happening, he decided to go out immediately to the garden. But poor Alicia! When he arrived at the door, he found that he had forgotten the little gold key, and when he returned to the table to pick it up, he discovered that he was unable to reach it. She could see it clearly through the glass, and tried hard to climb one of the legs of the table, but it was too slippery. And when she got tired of trying, the poor girl sat down on the floor and started crying. "Come on! There's no point in crying like this," Alice said to herself quite firmly. "I advise you to stop crying now." Alicia usually gave herself very good advice, though she rarely followed it, and sometimes scolded so hard that tears sprang up. She even remembered trying to pull her ears once for cheating at a croquet game that she played herself, because this curious creature liked to behave as if it were two people at the same time. But it would be of no use to me now to behave as if I were two people, thought poor Alice, when it is already hard enough for me to be one person as God commands. Shortly afterwards, his gaze was set on a small glass box under the table. He opened it and found a tiny cupcake inside, in which the word "eat me" was red, deliciously written with currant. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow up, I can take the key, and if it makes me even smaller, I can slip under the door. One way or another I will enter the garden, and that is what matters." She gave a little nibble and asked nervously to herself, "Where? Where to?" At the same time, she took a hand to her head to see which direction the change was starting from, and was very surprised to see that it remained the same size. In reality, this is what usually happens when you take a bite of a cake. But Alicia was already so used to it that everything that happened to her was extraordinary, that she found it very boring and very silly that life went through normal channels. So he took action, and in a flash he gave good account of the cupcake. Chapter 2. The Puddle of Tears. "Oh, curiosity and curiosity!" exclaimed Alicia. She was so surprised that for a moment she forgot to speak correctly. Alice, now I'm stretching like the longest telescope ever. "Goodbye, feet!" he cried, for when he looked down he saw that his feet were already so far away that he seemed to lose sight of them. "Oh, my poor little feet! I wonder who will put your shoes and socks on now? Surely I won't be able to do it. I will be too far away to take care of you personally. You will have to arrange it as you can." "But I will have to be kind to them," thought Alice. "Or maybe they won't take me in the direction I want to go. Let's see, I'll give you a new pair of shoes every Christmas." And he kept planning how to do it. "You'll have to go by mail. And how funny this will be to send gifts to your own feet. And what a shock the direction will be. Mr. Right foot of Alice fireplace rug, next to the fire guard, with a hug from Alice. My God, what great nonsense I'm saying." Just at this moment, his head hit the ceiling of the room. Indeed, he was now more than 2 meters tall. He quickly picked up the little gold lamp and ran to the garden door. Poor Alice! The most he could do was to lie on his side and look at the garden with one eye. Getting into it was now more difficult than ever. He sat down on the floor and cried again. "You should be ashamed," said Alicia. "Alice, a girl as big as you, now I could say that, and start crying like this. Stop immediately." But he continued to cry like a thing, pouring out liters of tears, until a real puddle formed around him, about 10 centimeters deep and covering half the floor of the room. Soon he heard a sound of footsteps in the distance, and quickly dried his eyes to see who was coming. It was the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came running in a hurry, while he was grumbling to himself, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! How will she be if I make her wait?" Alicia felt so desperate that she was ready to call for help from anyone. So when the rabbit was near her, he began to say to her in a low voice, "Please, sir." The rabbit was startled, dropped his white kid gloves and fan, and ran away in the dark. Alicia picked up the fan and gloves, and as it was very hot in the hall, she was waving all the time while saying, "My God! What strange things happened today! And yesterday everything happened as usual. I wonder if I have changed during the night. Let's see, was I the same when I woke up this morning? I seem to remember feeling a little different. But if I am not the same, then the next question is, who the hell am I? And this is the great enigma." And she started thinking about all the girls she knew who were her age, to see if she could have become one of them. "I am sure I am not Ada," she said, "for her hair falls into large curls, and mine has no half curl. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, because I know a lot of things, and she knows very little. Besides, she is her, and I am me, and... My God, what a puzzle! I'll see if I know all the things I knew before. Let's see, 4 times 5 12, and 4 times 6 13, and 4 times 7. My God! So I will never reach 20. Anyway, the multiplication table means nothing. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome, no, I said it all wrong, I'm sure. I must have become Mabel. I will try, for example, the industrious bee. He crossed his hands over his lap and noticed that the voice was hoarse and strange and the words were not what they should be. You see how the industrious crocodile takes advantage of its luscious tail and pours the waters of the Nile for on its golden scales. With what joy he shows his teeth, with how carefully he lays his nails, and is dedicated to inviting the little fish so that they enter into their smiling jaws. Oh my, that's not the right words, I'm sure. And poor Alice's eyes were filled with tears again. Sure, I am Mabel. And I'll have to go live in that horrible shack, and I'll have almost no toys to play with, and so many lessons to learn. No, I am completely determined. If I am Mabel, I will stay here. It will be useless for them to stick their heads out of the well and say to me, "Come back out, darling." I will just look up and say, "Who am I now? Let's see. Tell me this first, and then if I like being that person, I'll go back up. If I don't like it, I'll stay down here until I'm someone else." But my God, exclaimed Alice, a sea of tears dash, how I would like their heads to really stick out from the well. Alice, I'm so tired of being down here alone. As he said these words, his gaze fixed on his hands, and he saw with surprise that while he was speaking he had put on one of the little white kid gloves of the rabbit. How could I do that? He asked. I must have shrunk again. He got up and went to the table to check his measurement. And he found that, according to his guesswork, he was now no more than 60 centimeters tall, and kept on shrinking rapidly. He realized at once that the cause of all was the fan in his hand, and released it in a hurry, just in time not to disappear altogether. Good, I got away, said Alicia, quite frightened by that unexpected change, but very happy to be healthy and safe. And now to the garden! And he ran to the door. But, alas! The little door was closed again, and the golden key remained as before on the glass table. Things are worse than ever, thought poor Alice. Because she had never been so small as now, never. She was, and I declare that the situation is becoming impossible. While saying these words, a foot slipped, and a second later, chap! I was sunk to the neck in salt water. The first thing that occurred to him was that he had somehow fallen into the sea. And in this case I will be able to return home by train, he said to himself. Alice had only been to the beach once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that, wherever one went, the English coast was always full of bathing houses, children playing with shovels on the sand, then a row of houses and behind it a railway station. However, he soon understood that he was in the pool of tears he had shed when he was almost 3 meters tall. Wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alicia, as she swam around trying to find the way out. Suppose I shall now receive the punishment and die drowned in my own tears. It will be a strange thing indeed. But everything is strange today. At this moment he heard someone splashing in the pool, not far from her, and swam there to see who it was. At first she thought it was a walrus or a hippo, but then she remembered how small she was now, and understood that she was just a mouse who had fallen into the pool like her. Will it help now, Alicia asked, to address this mouse? Everything is so extraordinary down here, that I wouldn't be surprised if anything could talk. Anyway, nothing's lost by trying. So, Alice began to say, "Oh, mouse, do you know how to get out of this puddle? And I'm so tired of swimming from side to side, oh, mouse." Alice thought this would be the right way to address a mouse. She had never seen her in such a situation before, but she recalled reading in her brother's Latin grammar the mouse of the mouse to the mouse for the mouse, oh, mouse. El Raton looked at her carefully, and it seemed to Alicia that one of his little eyes was winking at her. But he said nothing. Perhaps he does not know how to speak English, thought Alicia. It may be a French mouse, who came here with William the Conqueror. Because despite all her knowledge of history, Alice had no clear idea how long ago some things had taken place. He then continued, "Oh, est ma chat?" It was the first sentence of his French book. The mouse jumped out of the water unexpectedly and began to tremble from head to toe. "Oh, please forgive me!" Alicia shouted hastily, fearing to have hurt the poor animal's feelings. "I forgot that you don't like cats." "I don't like cats!" exclaimed the mouse in a sharp and passionate voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, maybe not," said Alicia in a conciliatory tone. "Don't get upset about it. And yet I wish I could teach our cat Dina. You would only need to see her to start liking cats." "She is so beautiful and so soft," said Alice, speaking almost to herself as she was swimming lazy in the pool, "and she purrs so sweetly by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. And it's so nice to hold her, and she's so skilled at hunting mice." "Oh, forgive me, please!" Alice cried again, because this time the mouse had all his hair on end and he had to be really angry. "We will not speak of Dina, if you do not want to." "We shall speak!" squealed the mouse, who was shaking to the very tip of his tail. "As if I were to speak of such a subject. Our family has always hated cats, disgusting, despicable, vulgar critters. We have never seen. Let me never hear this word again." "No more," said Alice, hastening to change the subject of the conversation. Are you a friend of the dogs?" Elraton did not say anything and Alicia continued to say, "Ram down. There is a puppy near home so cute that I would like you to meet him. A little shiny-eyed terrier, you know, with long, curly, brown hair. And if you throw a stick, he goes and brings it, and sits on 2 legs to ask for food, and many other things. I can't remember even half. And it's from a farmer, you know, and the farmer says that it's such a useful dog he wouldn't sell it for £100. He says that he kills all the rats and—" "My God!" exclaimed Alice, upset. "I fear I have offended him again." Because the mouse swam away from her with all his strength, and organized a real storm in the pond with its violent splash. Alicia called him sweetly as she swam behind him, "Dear little mouse, go back, and we will not talk about cats or dogs, since you do not like them." When the mouse heard these words, he turned and swam slowly towards her. He had a pale face, of emotion, thought Alice, and said with a trembling voice, "Let's go to the shore, and there I will tell you my story, and then you will understand why I hate cats and dogs." It was time to get out of there, for the pond was filling more and more with birds and animals that had fallen into it. There were a duck and a dodo, a parrot and a harpy and other curious creatures. Alicia opened the march and the whole group swam to shore. Chapter 3. A Crazy Race and a Long Story. The group that gathered on the shore looked really strange. The birds with dirty feathers, the other animals with hair stuck to their bodies, and all drawn to the bone, grumpy and uncomfortable. The first thing was, of course, to discuss how they would dry themselves. They discussed it among themselves, and within a few minutes it seemed most natural to Alice to be at that meeting and to speak familiarly with the animals, as if she knew them from all life. He even had a long discussion with the parrot, which ended up being very stubborn and without wanting to say anything else that I'm older than you, and I have to know better. And as Alicia refused to give up without knowing the parrot's age, and the parrot refused to confess his age, the conversation ended. Finally the mouse, who seemed to have some authority within the group, shouted, "Sit down and listen. All of you, I assure you that I will dry you in a flash." All sat down, forming a wide circle, with the mouse in the middle. Alicia kept her eyes anxiously fixed on him, because she was sure he would catch a cold if he did not dry out at once. "Yum," the mouse said with airs of importance. "Are you ready? This is the driest, and therefore driest story I know. It's a silence, everyone, please." William the Conqueror, whose cause was supported by the Pope, was very soon accepted by the English, who needed a chief and were long accustomed to usurpations and conquests. Edwindo y Morcarro, Dukes of Mercia and Northumbria, UF, grazed the parrot with a chill. "With forgiveness," said the mouse, frowning, but with a lot of courtesy. "Did you say anything?" "Not me," the parrot hastened to reply. "Well, I had thought so," said the mouse. I continue. Edwindo and Morcarro, Dukes of Mercia and Northumbria, stood in their favor, and even Stigandio, The patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury found it convenient. He found what? Asked the duck. He found him, said the mouse, a little angry. Of course you know what he means. Of course I know what he means, Duck grumbled. When I find something, it is almost always a frog or a worm. What I want to know is what the Archbishop found. Elraton acted as if he had not heard this question and hastened to continue his story. He found it convenient, and decided to go with Edgardo Athelingo to meet Guillermo and offer him the crown. William acted at first with restraint. But the insolence of his Normans. How do you feel now, my dear? Continued, addressing Alice. As wet as at first, said Alice in a melancholy tone. This story is very dry, but it seems that nothing dries me. In this case, said the dodo solemnly as he stood up, I propose that we take a recess and move to the immediate adoption of more radical remedies. Speak in Christian, protested the eagle owl. I don't know what half of these high-pitched words mean, and more than that, I don't think you know what they mean either. And the eagle lowered his head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds laughed without concealment. What I was going to say, the dodo continued in an offended tone, is that the best way to dry us would be a crazy race. What is a crazy race? Asked Alicia, and not because she was very eager to find out, but because the dodo had paused, as if waiting for someone to say something, and no one seemed willing to say anything. Well, the best way to explain it is to do so. And if any of you want to also do a crazy race on any winter day, I'll tell you how the dodo organized it. He first drew a track for the race, more or less in a circle. The exact shape is not important, he said, and then the whole group was placed here and there along the track. There was no a la una, a las dos, a las tres, yeah, but everyone started to run when they wanted, and each stopped when they wanted, so that it was not easy to know when the race ended. However, when they had been running for about half an hour and were dry again, the dodo suddenly cried, "The race is over." And all gathered around him, sighing, asking, "But who has won?" The dodo could not answer this question without giving himself up to long musings, and he spent a long time reflecting with one finger resting on his forehead, the posture in which the thinkers are almost always portrayed, while the others waited silently. Finally the dodo said, "We have all won, and we all have to receive a prize." "But who will give the prizes?" asked a chorus of voices. "For she, of course," said the dodo, pointing to Alice. And the whole group huddled around Alicia, shouting like crazy, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice didn't know what to do, and she hopelessly put a hand in her pocket, and found a box of sweets. Luckily the salt water hadn't gotten into it, and handed them out as prizes. There was exactly one confit for each of them. "But she must also have a prize," said the mouse. "Of course he did," the dodo approved with gravity, and addressing Alice, asked, "What else do you have in your pocket?" "Just the thimble," said Alice. "Come the thimble," said the dodo. And then they all surrounded her once more, while the dodo solemnly offered her the thimble with the words, "We beg you to accept this elegant thimble." And after this very short speech, everyone applauded enthusiastically. Alicia thought all this was very absurd, but the others seemed to take it so seriously that she dared not laugh, and, as she did not think of anything to say, she merely bowed, and took the thimble with a solemn air. It was time to eat the confits, which caused quite a lot of noise and confusion, because the big birds complained that they knew little, and the small birds choked and had to give them pats on the back. However, they finally finished with the confetti, and again sat in a circle, and asked the mouse to tell them another story. "You promised to tell me your life, remember?" said Alicia. "And why do you hate the G and the P?" he added in a whisper, not daring to name cats and dogs by their full names so as not to offend the mouse again. "Drag behind me a very long and very sad reality," exclaimed the mouse, addressing Alice and letting out a sigh. "Of course, you drag a very long tail," said Alice, as she stared admiringly at the mouse's tail, "but why do you say it is sad?" And so convinced was Alicia that the mouse was referring to his tail, that when he began to speak, the story he told took in Alicia's imagination a form like this /T. Some fury said to a mouse that he found in his house, We're going to go June_T before the law. I will ACUB, and you will defend yourself. Come on. I will not admit more /T discussions. We have to have a process. Because this morning I had nothing else to do. The mouse replied to the fury. That lawsuit, if you know, will not serve if we do not have judge and jury, /T, and will only serve to shout at each other like a couple of fools. And replied the Furia. I will be /T at the same time the judge and jury. The old Furia said it so tacitly. I will be the one who says /T all that is to be circ, and also who to mure with of nay. You're not listening to me, the mouse protested, addressing Alice Dash. Where is your head? Please don't get angry, said Alice softly. If I'm not mistaken, you were already on the 5th lap. None of that, Mouse squealed. What laps are you talking about? Oh, you are mocking me and only saying nonsense. And the mouse got up and left very angry. It was without wanting to, exclaimed poor Alice Dash. But you get angry so easily. The mouse only replied with a growl, while he kept moving away. Please come back and finish your story, cried Alice behind him. The other animals joined her in a chorus, shouting, Yes, come back, please. But the mouse moved his head impatiently and hastened to go. What a pity he did not want to stay. The parrot sighed, when the mouse had lost sight of himself. And an old crab took the opportunity to say to her daughter, Oh, honey, may it be a lesson to you not to ever let yourself be carried away by your temper. Shut up, Mama, protested the crab girl. She said you are capable of breaking the patience of an oyster. Wish Dina were here with us, Alicia said aloud, but without addressing anyone in particular. She would bring the mouse to us in a jiffy. Yes, and who is Dina, if I may ask? Wanted to know the parrot. Alicia answered enthusiastically, because she was always ready to talk about her favorite friend. Dina is our cat. And you can't imagine how clever she is to hunt mice. Wonderful! And I wish you could see her chasing birds. Oh, she eats a little bird in the blink of an eye. These words made a terrible impression on the animals around her. Some birds rushed to take off. An old magpie snuggled up between her feathers, while she mumbled, I have no choice but to go home. The cold of the night does not suit my throat. And a canary gathered all his little ones, while he said to them with a quivering voice, Come on, dear. It's time for you all to go to bed. And so, under different pretexts, they all left, and in a few seconds Alicia found herself completely alone. If only I had not spoken of Dina, he said in a melancholy tone. Down here, my cat doesn't seem to like anyone, and yet I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Ah, my Dina, my dear Dina. I wonder if I will ever see you again. And poor Alicia started crying again, because she felt very lonely and very depressed. Soon, however, he heard a sound of footsteps in the distance again and looked up with hope, thinking that perhaps the mouse had changed his mind and was back to finish his story. Chapter 4. The Rabbit House. It was the White Rabbit, who came back with a little jumping trotter and looked around anxiously as if he had lost something. And Alice heard him murmur, The Duchess! The Duchess! Oh, my dear little legs! Oh, my skin and my whiskers! Oh, he will make me run, as sure as the crickets are crickets. Where the hell could I have dropped them? Where? Where? Alicia understood instantly that she was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and full of goodwill she too started to look everywhere, but found no trace of them. In reality, everything seemed to have changed since she fell into the puddle, and the glass table and doorway had completely disappeared. Shortly after, the rabbit discovered the presence of Alice, who was looking for the gloves and fan from side to side, and he shouted very angry, How, Marianne, what the hell are you doing here? Run home immediately, and bring me a pair of gloves and a fan. Hurry! Alicia was so frightened that she ran off in the direction the rabbit pointed, without trying to explain that she was the wrong person. You have me confused with your maid, she said as she ran. What a surprise she will take when she finds out who I am. But I'd better get you your fan and your gloves. Well, if I can find them. As he spoke these words, he came to a pretty little house, at whose door shone a bronze plaque with the name C. White engraved on it. Alicia entered without knocking, and ran upstairs, very afraid of finding the real Mary and then being thrown out of the house before she had found the gloves and fan. How strange it seems, said Alicia, that of walking errands for a rabbit. Alice, I guess after this Dina will also send me to do her errands. And he began to imagine what would happen in this case. Miss Alicia, come here immediately and get ready for a walk, the nanny would say, and she would have to answer, I'm coming right away. Now I can't, because I have to watch this mousetrap until Dina returns and make sure no mouse escapes dash. Of course, Alicia continued to say, if Dina was to start giving us orders, I don't think she would stay long in our house. To all this, I had managed to get to a small bedroom, very tidy, with a table by the window, and on the table, as I expected, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. He took the fan and a pair of gloves, and, as he was about to leave the room, his gaze fell on a small bottle that was next to the dressing table mirror. This time there was no sign with the word bebeam, but anyway Alicia uncovered it and took it to her lips. I am sure that if I eat or drink something interesting will happen, he said. And I will see what happens with this bottle. I hope it will grow me back, because actually, I'm pretty tired of being such a tiny thing. And wow, you made it grow! Oh, much faster than I imagined. Before he had drunk half the bottle, he found his head touching the ceiling and had to bend it so that his neck would not be broken. He hurried to drop the bottle, while saying, enough. I hope it doesn't grow anymore. Anyway, I don't walk through the door anymore. Oh, wish I hadn't drunk so fast. Unfortunately, it was too late to think about it. He kept growing, and very soon he had to get on his knees on the ground. A minute later she had no room to kneel down, and had to try to get herself on the ground, with one elbow against the door and the other arm around her neck. But he kept growing, and as a last resort, he pulled an arm out of the window and put a foot down the chimney, while saying, now I can't do anything else, whatever happens. What will become of me? Luckily the magic bottle had already produced its full effect, and Alice stopped growing. Anyway, she was uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no possibility of ever leaving that room again, it is not surprising that she also felt very unhappy. It was much more pleasant to be at home, poor Alicia thought. There, at least, I did not spend time growing and shrinking in size, and taking orders from mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gotten into the rabbit's den. And yet, despite everything, there is no denying that this kind of life is interesting. Myself, I wonder what has happened to me. When I read fairy tales, I never thought these things could happen in reality. And here you have me up to my neck in an adventure like this. I think a book should be written about me, yes sir. And when I'm older, I'll write it myself. But I can't be older than I am now, he added with a gloomy voice. At least there's no room left for me to grow older while I'm stuck in here. But then, will I never become older than I am now? On the one hand, this would be an advantage, I would never become old. But on the other hand, always have lessons to learn. What a tin! It's that I would not like anything. But what a fool you are, Alicia! She challenged herself. How can you study lessons stuck in here? Hardly any room for you, and certainly not a corner for textbooks. And so she continued to talk for a long time, sometimes in one direction and others taking it the opposite way, keeping in the end a very serious conversation, as if it were two people. Until she heard a voice outside the house, and stopped arguing with herself to listen. Mary Ann! Mary Ann! Said the voice dash. Bring me my gloves immediately. Then Alicia heard a noise of steps down the stairs. He understood that it was the rabbit who came up to him and shook so hard that he shook the whole house, forgetting that he was now 1,000 times bigger than the white rabbit, and there was therefore no reason to be afraid of him. Now the rabbit had come to the door, and tried to open it, but as the door opened inward and Alice's elbow was firmly against it, he could not move it. Alicia heard it said to herself, well then I'll turn around and go in through the window. That's not true, thought Alicia. And after waiting until he thought he heard the rabbit just below the window, He suddenly opened his hand and made a gesture to catch whatever was within reach. He found nothing, but heard a small screeching sound, something falling and a crash of broken glass, which made him assume that the rabbit had fallen over a greenhouse or something. Then a very angry voice was heard, which was the rabbit. "Pat! Pat! Where are you? Where are you?" And another voice, which Alice had not heard before. "Here I am, sir. Digging for apples, with the Lord's permission." "You had to be precisely digging for apples," replied the rabbit, very irritated. "Come here immediately, and help me out of this." There was more noise of broken glass. "And now tell me, Pat, what is that on the window?" "It is certainly an arm, Sir and he pronounced brasso." "An arm, Majadero? Who has ever seen an arm of this size?" But if you fill the whole window." "Sure it fills, sir. And yet it is an arm." "Well, whatever it is doesn't have to be in my window. Go and get it out of there." There was a long silence, and Alice could only hear brief whispers from time to time, like, "I sure don't like this at all, sir. What is said, nothing, and do what I tell you, coward." Finally, Alicia opened her hand again and moved it in the air as if she wanted to catch something. This time there were two screeching sounds and more glass shattering. "How many glass greenhouses must be down there?" thought Alice. "I wonder what they will do now. If it is to throw me out of the window, I wish they could. I have no desire to stay locked in here for a long time." She waited a few minutes without hearing anything else. He finally heard the grinding of a wheelbarrow and the sound of many voices speaking all at once. He could understand some words. "Where is the other ladder?" "I was only told to bring one. The other will be Bill." "Bill! Bring the ladder here, boy. Here, put them in this corner." "No, first tie them together, so they won't get halfway." "Sure they will come, don't be heavy. Come here, Bill, hold on to this rope. Will the roof support this weight? Oh, beware of this loose tile. Hey, it falls! Beware of the head." Here a strong fall was heard. "Wow, who did it?" "I think it was Bill. Who's going down the chimney?" "Me? Nay. You get off." "No way. You have to get off, Bill." "Come here, Bill. The master says you must go down the chimney." "Wow. So is Bill the one who has to go down the chimney?" said Alice. "It seems that everything is taken away from Bill. I would not like to be in his skin. This fireplace is certainly narrow, but I think I will be able to give some kick for it." Alicia sank her foot as far into the fireplace as she could, and waited until she heard that the bestizuela, she couldn't know what kind of animal it was digging and scratching inside the fireplace, right above her. Then, as she said to herself, "Here's Bill," she kicked hard and waited to see what happened next. The first thing he heard was a chorus of voices shouting to one, "There goes Bill," and then the voice of the rabbit alone, "Take it! Hey! Oh, those of you standing by the fence." A silence followed, and a new avalanche of voices, "Raise your head. Come a drink. Without drowning. What happened, friend? Tell us everything." At last a faint, high-pitched voice was heard, which Alicia assumed would be Bill's voice. "Well, I know almost nothing. I don't want more cognac, thanks, I feel better. I'm so stunned that I don't know what to say. All I remember is something hit me hard, and I went up like a doll in a box of surprises." "Sure, buddy. Oh, we have seen that already," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice. And Alice cried with all her might, "If you do, I will throw Dina against you." There was an instant silence of death, and Alice thought to herself, "I wonder what they will do now. If they had a shred of common sense, they would raise the roof." After a minute or two they all once more set in motion, and Alice heard the rabbit say, "With a cart we will have enough to start." A load of what? Alicia thought. And he didn't have to wait long to find out, because a hail of stones came through the window, and some hit him in the face. "Now I will end this," said Alice to herself, and added in a loud voice, "You'd better not repeat it." These words produced another death silence. Alicia noticed, with some surprise, that the pebbles were turning into tea cakes on the floor, and a brilliant idea immediately came to her head. If I eat one of these pastes, he thought, it will certainly produce some change in my stature. And since there is no chance of me growing any bigger, I suppose I will have to become smaller. He ate one of the pastries, and saw with joy that it was beginning to shrink immediately. As soon as she was small enough to pass through the door, she ran out of the house and found a rather large group of animals and birds waiting for her. A lizard, Bill, was in the center, held by 2 guinea pigs, who gave him something to drink from a bottle. The moment Alicia appeared, everyone jumped on her. But Alice ran with all her might, and soon found herself safe in a thick forest. "The first thing I have to do now," said Alicia as she wandered through the forest, "is grow back into my stature. And the second thing is to find a way into that beautiful garden. I think this is the best course of action." It certainly seemed an excellent plan, and set out in a very clear and simple way. The only difficulty was that I had no idea how to do it. And as she looked anxiously through the trees, a small bark that sounded just above her head stared up. A huge puppy looked at her from above with his big eyes wide open and timidly stretched out a little leg to touch her. "What a beautiful thing!" Alice said in a very affectionate tone, and tried unsuccessfully to give her a whistle, but she was also terribly frightened, because she thought the puppy might be hungry, and in this case it was most likely that he would devour her with one bite, despite all his mimes. Almost unaware of what he was doing, he took a dry twig from the ground and lifted it towards the puppy, and the puppy leapt with all 4 legs in the air, let out a bark of satisfaction, and jumped on the stick as an attack. Then Alice quickly slipped behind a large thistle, not to be run over, and as soon as she appeared on the other side, the cub again rushed against the stick with such enthusiasm that he lost his balance and threw himself into a somersault. Then Alice, thinking that it was much like playing with a horse percheron, and fearing to be trampled at any moment by his gills, again took refuge behind the thistle. Then the puppy began a series of lightning attacks against the stick, running each time a little forward and afar back, and barking husky all the time, until finally he sat down at some distance, gasping, tongue hanging out of mouth and big eyes half closed. This seemed to Alicia a good opportunity to escape. So he ran, and ran to the limit of his strength, and until he was out of breath, and until the puppy's barking sounded very weak in the distance. And despite everything, what a cute puppy he was! Alicia, leaning against the bell to rest and waving one of her leaves, she what I would have liked to teach games, if I had the right size to do it. My God! If I had, I almost forgot that I have to grow up again. Let's see, what do I have to do to achieve it? I suppose I would have to eat or drink something, but what? This is the big dilemma. Really, the big dilemma was what? Alice looked around at the flowers and grass leaves, but she saw nothing that looked like it was suitable for food or drink in those circumstances. There stood a large mushroom, about the same height as Alice. And when he had looked under it, and on both sides, and behind it, it occurred to him that it would be best to look and see what was above. He stood on tiptoe, and looked over the edge of the mushroom, and his eyes were immediately met with the eyes of a large blue caterpillar, who was sitting on top of the mushroom with her arms crossed, smoking a long pipe quietly and without paying the least attention to Alicia or anything else. Chapter 5. Tips of a Caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice were looking at each other for a while in silence. Finally the caterpillar took the pipe out of its mouth, and addressed the girl with a languid, adored voice. "Who are you?" the caterpillar said. It was not a very encouraging way to start a conversation. Alicia replied a little intimidated, "I hardly know, madam, what I am at the moment. Yes, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I've changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" asked the caterpillar severely. "See if you can clear yourself." "I fear that I cannot clarify anything with myself, madam," said Alicia, "because I am not myself, you see." "I see nothing," protested the caterpillar. "I fear that I will not be able to explain it more clearly," Alicia insisted with a gentle voice, "because to begin with I do not even understand myself, and that of changing so many times in one day is quite disconcerting." "Nothing turns out," replied the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you have not felt anything like this until now," said Alicia, but when it becomes a chrysalis, which will happen any day, and then a butterfly, I think everything will seem a little strange to you, don't you? Not a shred, said the caterpillar. Well, perhaps your feelings are different from mine, because I assure you that it would be very strange for me. To you, said the caterpillar with scorn dash. Who are you? Which brings us back to the beginning of the conversation. Alicia was beginning to feel annoyed with the caterpillar, for those observations so dry and sharp, so she became stiff as a radish and said severely, I think it is you who should tell me first who is. Why? The caterpillar asked. It was another difficult question, and as Alicia did not come up with any convincing answer and as the caterpillar seemed to remain in a most unfriendly mood, the girl turned around to leave. She come here. The caterpillar called her behind her dash. I have something important to tell you. These words sounded promising, and Alice turned back again. Watch this bad temper, the caterpillar said. Is that all? Alicia asked, swallowing the rage as best she could. No, said the caterpillar. Alicia decided it would be better to wait, as she had nothing else to do, and see if the caterpillar finally said something worth doing. For a few minutes the caterpillar continued to smoke without saying a word, but then she opened her arms, pulled the pipe out of her mouth again and said, So you think you have changed, don't you? I'm afraid so, ma'am. I don't remember things that I used to know very well, and 10 minutes don't go by without a change in size. Do you remember what things? Well, I tried to recite the verses of See how industrious be, but everything came out different, completely different, and I kept talking about crocodiles. Well, we'll do one thing. What? Tell me that. He's aged, Father Guillermo, the caterpillar ordered. Alicia crossed her arms and began to recite the poem. You have aged, Father Guillermo, said the boy, and your hair is full of gray. However, always makes the pine with your years still has the desire? When young, Father William said to his son, I did not want to harm my head, but it no longer frightens me, that of my brains I have very little left. He has aged, said the boy. As already said, yet he came tumbling in. How can he still walk like a bug? When young, said the sage, waving his white hair, I kept my body very agile with medicinal help, and if I may be frank, you must taste it not to end weak. He has aged, said the boy, and has teeth useless for more than water and wine, but he has sucked the goose to the frail bones. Let's see, sir, what is the tact? When I was young, said his father, I strove to be a lawyer, and discussed the law with my wife, and for that, all my life has lasted me a very strong and muscular jaw. He has aged, and it would be very strange, said the boy, if he still had perfect sight. How did he make this eel dance in his beak so straight? 3 questions you've already posed, and I won't answer any more. If you don't leave now, what a blow I'll give you! That's not right, said the caterpillar. No, I'm afraid it's not quite right, Alicia said shyly. Some words may have stirred my mind. It is wrong from top to bottom, the caterpillar said in an unrelenting tone, and followed a silence of several minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size would you like to have? He asked. I'm not difficult in size matters, Alicia replied quickly dash. It's just not nice to be changing so often, you know. I know nothing, said the caterpillar. Alicia did not answer. Never in his life had he been so opposed, and felt that his patience was running out. Are you happy with your current size? Asked the caterpillar. Well, I'd like to be a little taller, if you don't mind. 7 centimeters is such an insignificant height. It's a perfect height, said the caterpillar very angry. Getting up how long it was, it measured exactly 7 centimeters. But I'm not used to measuring 7 centimeters. Poor Alice moaned with a sorrowful voice, while she thought to herself, I wish these creatures would not be so easily offended. You will get used to it, said the caterpillar, and put his pipe back in his mouth and started smoking again. This time Alicia waited patiently for her to decide to speak again. After a minute or two the caterpillar took the pipe out of its mouth, yawned and sprang. Then he went down from the mushroom and began to slide on the grass, at a time when he said, dash, one side will make you grow, and the other side will make you decrease. A side of what? The other side of what? said Alice to herself. About the mushroom, said the caterpillar, as if the girl had asked her aloud. And after a few moments he was out of sight. Alicia sat a while contemplating the mushroom, in an attempt to discover what its two sides would be, and, as it was perfectly round, the problem was not easy. So, he spread his arms as much as he could around the mushroom and tore off with each hand a little bit. And now it was said which will be which? He nibbled on the piece of his right hand to see the effect and instantly felt a hard blow on his chin. The chin had hit his feet. He was very frightened by this sudden change, but he understood that it was rapidly shrinking in size, that there was not so much time to lose and that he had to hurry up to bite the other piece. His jaw was so tight against his feet that it was difficult to open his mouth, but he finally managed to swallow a small piece of the mushroom in his left hand. "Well, my head is finally free," Alice said with relief, but the relief immediately became alarm, when she noticed that she had lost sight of her own shoulders. All she could see, looking down, was a very long piece of neck, which seemed to sprout like a stalk of green leaves from the sea, extending far below it. "What can all this green be?" said Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone? And oh my poor hands, how can I not see you?" While he spoke, he moved his hands, but it seemed to get no result, except a slight shudder that shook the distant green leaf. As there was no way that his hands could reach his head, he decided to lower his head down to his hands, and found with enthusiasm that his neck would bend very easily in any direction, like a snake. He had just managed to get his head down in the air in a funny zigzag and was about to put it between the leaves, which he discovered were nothing more than the tops of the trees under which he had been walking before, when a sharp whistle made her back in a hurry. A large dove rushed against her head and struck her violently with its wings. "Snake!" screeched the dove. "I am not a snake," Alicia protested, very indignant. "And leave me alone." "Snake, more than snake," Paloma followed, though in a less convinced tone, and added in a sort of whimper, "I have tried everything, and nothing has worked." "I have no idea what you are saying," Alicia said. "I have tried it in the roots of trees, and I have tried it on the banks, and I have tried it in the hedges," continued Dove, not listening to what Alice was saying. "But always these snakes. There is no way to get rid of them." Alicia was feeling increasingly confused, but she thought that all she could say now would be for naught, and that it was better to wait until the dove finished her speech. "As if it were not already too much trouble to hatch the eggs," said the dove. "On top of that, you must guard them day and night against snakes. I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks." "Sorry you suffer so much inconvenience," said Alicia, who was beginning to understand the meaning of the dove's words. "And just when I choose the tallest tree in the forest," continued the dove, raising her voice with a shriek, "and just when I thought I was finally free of them, they must begin to descend from heaven. Though what a disgusting snake! But I tell him that I am not a snake. I am a... Well, what are you?" said the dove. "Let's see what the hell you invent now." "I am a little girl," said Alicia, full of doubts, because she was very much aware of all the changes that had occurred throughout the day. "Another with this tail," answered the dove, in tone of deepest contempt. "I've seen lots of little girls in my life, but none with a neck like yours. No, no! You are a snake, and there is no point in denying it. Now I suppose you will tell me that you have eaten an egg." "Well, eggs if I have eaten," admitted Alicia, who always said the truth. "But girls also eat eggs, just like snakes, you know." "I don't think so," said the dove, "but if it is true that they eat eggs, then they are nothing more than a variety of snakes, and that's all." It was such a new idea for Alice, that she was mute for 1 or 2 minutes, which gave the dove an opportunity to add, "You're looking for eggs. If I will know it. And what does it matter to me that you are a child or a snake?" "Well, it matters to me," Alice hastened to declare. "And it also happens that I'm not looking for eggs. And even if I were looking for eggs, I wouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well then, get out," growled the dove, while it was put back in the nest. Alicia was laboriously diving between the trees. His neck was tangled between the branches and he had to stand at every moment to free him. After a while, he remembered that he still had the mushroom pieces, and he carefully set to work, nibbling one and then the other, growing up and down again, until he regained his normal height. It had been so long since he had even approached his size, that at first it was a little strange. But it didn't take much to get used to, and she started talking to herself as she used to. Wow, I've accomplished half my plan. Oh, how disconcerting these changes are. One cannot be sure of what will happen next minute. The truth is that I have regained my... Chapter 6. Pork and Pepper. Alicia stood staring at the house for a minute or two, and wondering what she was going to do, when suddenly a lackey with a livery ran out of the forest. Alicia thought he was a lackey because he was wearing a livery. If not, and judging only by his face, I would have said it was a fish, and slammed his knuckles hard against the door. Another lackey in a livery opened the door, with a round face and big frog eyes. And the two lackeys, Alice observed, had their hair powdery and curly. He became very curious about what was going on and left the forest cautiously to hear what they were saying. The fish lackey began by pulling out from under his arm a large letter, almost as big as himself, and handed it to the other lackey, while he said in solemn tone, "For the Duchess. An invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog lackey repeated it, in the same solemn tone, but changing a little the order of the words, "From the Queen. An invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then the two made a deep bow, and the dusty curls clashed and tangled. Alicia had such a laugh that she had to run and hide in the woods for fear of being heard. And when he came back, the lacaipes had gone away, and the other was sitting on the floor by the door, staring stupidly at the sky. Alicia approached timidly and knocked on the door. "No use knocking," said the footman, "for two reasons. First, because I am on the same side of the door as you. Second, because they are making such a noise inside the house that it is impossible for them to hear you." And indeed, a terrible noise came out of the house, howling, sneezing, and every now and then a thunderous blow, as if a plate or pot had been broken into 1,000 pieces. "Tell me then, please," asked Alicia, "what I have to do to enter." "Knocking on the door would help something," continued the footman without hearing her. "If we had the door between us. For example, if you were inside, you could call, and I could open the door so you'd come out, you know." He had been looking up at the sky all along, while speaking, and this seemed to Alice decidedly rude. "But maybe he can't help it," he said to himself. "His eyes are so high up on his head." Although he could at least answer when asked something. "What do I have to do to get in?" he repeated now loudly. "I will be sitting here," the footman observed, "until tomorrow." At this moment the door of the house opened, and a large plate came out buzzing in the air, towards the head of the footman. He rubbed his nose and went to crash into one of the trees behind. "Or the day after tomorrow, perhaps," continued the lackey in the same tone of voice, as if nothing had happened. "What do I have to do to get in?" Alice asked again, raising her voice. "But do you really have to go in?" said the lackey. "This is the first thing to clarify, you know." It was the pure truth, but Alicia didn't like anything that they said it. "What a burden!" he mumbled to himself. "What a way of reasoning all these creatures have. There is to go crazy." The lackey found this a good opportunity to repeat his observation, with variations. "I will be sitting here," he said, "days and days." "But what do I have to do?" Alicia insisted. "Whatever you want," said the servant, and began whistling. "Oh, it's no use talking to him," Alice murmured in despair. "He is a complete idiot." He opened the door and entered the house. The door led directly to a large kitchen, which was completely full of smoke. In the center was the Duchess, sitting on a 3-legged stool with a baby in her arms. The cook leaned over the stove and waded through a huge pot that seemed to be full of soup. "This soup has too much pepper, of course," said Alice to herself, as she spat the first sneeze. Where there was too much pepper was in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed from time to time, and the baby sneezed and howled alternately, without a moment's respite. The only beings who did not sneeze in that kitchen were the cook and a chubby Gatazzo lying near the fire, with a smile from ear to ear. "Could you please tell me," asked Alicia shyly, Not too sure it was right for her to start the conversation. Why does her cat smile like that? It is a Cheshire cat, said the Duchess, so she smiles. Coquin! He shouted this last word with such sudden violence that Alice was about to jump, but she immediately realized it was meant for the baby, not her, so she regained courage and continued talking. I didn't know that Cheshire cats were always smiling. In fact, I didn't even know that cats could smile. Everyone can, said the Duchess, and many do. I didn't know of any that did, Alicia said very kindly, glad to have started a conversation. You know almost nothing of anything, said the Duchess. That is what happens. Alicia did not like the tone of the remark, and decided that it would be appropriate to change the subject. While she was thinking about which topic to choose, the cook pulled the pot of soup from the fire and began throwing everything that fell into her hands at the Duchess and the baby. First the irons of the household, then a rain of crockery, plates and fountains. The Duchess did not even notice when the projectiles hit her, and the baby was already crying so hard that it was impossible to know whether the blows were painful or not. Oh, please be careful with what you do, Alicia cried, as she jumped in a frenzy to dodge the projectile's dash. He's going to rip her precious nose off, added, seeing that an extraordinarily large cauldron flew very close to the Duchess's face. If each one of us would take care of his own affairs, the Duchess said in a growl, the world would turn much better and with less time. Which would not be of any advantage, said Alicia, who was very happy that there was an opportunity to show off her knowledge. If the earth turned faster, imagine the mess that would be made with day and night. You know that the earth takes 24 hours to make a complete turn on its own axis. Speaking of execution, the Duchess interrupted Dash. Let him have his head cut off. Alice looked anxiously at the cook to see if she was prepared to do something similar, but the cook was too busy stirring the soup and did not seem to listen to the conversation, so that Alice was encouraged to continue her lesson. 24 hours, I think, or 12? You will stop annoying me, said the Duchess Dash. Never have I endured calculations. And he began to rock the child again, while singing a kind of lullaby, and at the end of each verse gave the little one a strong jolt. Shout and beat the little boy if he starts sneezing, because it does the blessed only to annoy. Chorus, with participation of the cook and the baby, gwa, gwa, gwa. When the second stanza began, the Duchess threw the child into the air, then picked him up as he fell, with such violence that the creature screamed in a voice-over. Alicia could hardly distinguish the words, I yell at my son, and if he sneezes, he gets a beating. Why doesn't he like pepper when he wants it? Chorus gwa, gwa, gwa. Yay! Now you can rock him a little if you want to, the Duchess said at the end of the song, as she threw the baby into the air. Dash. I have to get ready for a game of croquet with the Queen. And the Duchess hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan at the last moment, but did not reach her. Alicia took the child in her arms with some difficulty, because it was a wee creature that struggled with arms and legs in all directions, like a starfish, thought Alicia. The poor little one snorted like a steam machine when she caught him, and he shrunk and stretched with such fury that during the first minutes Alicia saw them, and wished to prevent it from slipping away from her arms. As soon as she found a way to hold the child, which consisted of twisting him into a kind of knot, her left ear and right foot tightly fastened to prevent it from falling apart, Alicia took him out into the open. If I don't take this child with me, he thought, they will surely kill him in a day or two. Wouldn't it be a crime to leave him in this house? He said these last words in a loud voice, and the little one answered with a growl. By then he had stopped sneezing. Don't grunt, Alicia scolded her. That's no way to express yourself. The baby growled again, and Alicia looked at his face anxiously, to see if anything was wrong. There was no doubt that he had a very raised nose, much more like a snout than a real nose. Also, his eyes were getting too small to be baby eyes. Alicia didn't like the look of it. Perhaps it is because he has been crying, he thought, and looked back at his eyes to see if there were any tears. No, there were no tears. If you think of becoming a piglet, darling, said Alicia very seriously, I will not want anything to do with you. So be careful. The poor little creature again gave a whimper, or a growl. It was impossible to say, and the two walked in silence for a while. Alicia was beginning to wonder, and now, what am I going to do with this little boy when I return home? When the baby gave another growl, so violently that he looked at him again in alarm. This time there was no doubt. He was nothing more or less than a piglet, and Alicia thought it would be absurd to carry him on. So he left him on the ground, and was greatly relieved to see him running into the forest. If he had grown up, she said to herself, he would have been a terribly ugly child, but as a piglet he seems precious to me. And she started thinking about other children that she knew who would be very happy to become pigs. If we knew how to transform them, was being said, when she had a slight shock to see that the Cheshire Cat was sitting on a branch of a tree very close to her. The cat, when he saw Alicia, simply smiled. He seemed to have a good character, but he also had very long nails and lots of teeth, so it would be better to treat him with respect. Cheshire's Minnie Alice began timidly, as she was not quite sure whether she would like this treatment, but the cat did nothing more than widen her smile, so Alicia decided that he did. Cheshire's Minnie, could you tell me, please, which way I must go to get out of here? This depends in large part on the place you want to go, said the cat. I don't care much for the place, said Alicia. Then it doesn't matter much which way you go, said the cat. As long as it gets somewhere, added Alicia as an explanation. Oh, you will always get somewhere, the cat said, if you walk enough. Alicia thought this was a no-brainer, and decided to ask another question. What kind of people live around here? In this direction, said the cat, making a gesture with his right paw, lives a hatter. And in this direction, and made a gesture with the other leg, lives a March hare. Visit whoever you want. Both are crazy. But I don't like to treat crazy people, Alicia protested. Oh, you can't help that, said the cat. We're all crazy here. I'm crazy. You're crazy. How do you know that I'm crazy? Asked Alicia. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Alicia thought this proved nothing. However, she continued with her questions. And how do you know that you are crazy? To begin with, the cat replied, dogs are not crazy. Okay? I guess so, Alicia agreed. Very good. For in such a case, the cat went on, you know that dogs growl when they are angry, and move their tails when they are happy. Well, I growl when I'm happy, and I move my tail when I'm angry. So, I'm crazy. That's what I call purr, not growl, said Alice. Call it whatever you like, said the cat. Are you going to play croquet with the Queen today? I would like to, said Alicia, but for now they have not invited me. We will meet again there, the cat said, and he vanished. Alicia was not too surprised, so accustomed to strange things happening. He was still looking at the place where the cat had been, when it suddenly reappeared. By the way, what happened to the baby? Asked Dash. I forgot to ask. He became a piglet, answered Alice unflinchingly, as if the cat had returned in the most natural way. He knew it would end like this, said the cat, and disappeared again. Alice waited a little while, thinking that she might appear again, but she did not, and after 1 or 2 minutes the girl set out in the direction of the March hare which I had told her lived. Hatters I have seen some, he said to himself. The March hare will be much more interesting. And also, since we are in May, maybe I'm not crazy anymore. Or at least maybe I'm not as crazy as in March. As he said these words, he looked up, and there was the cat once more, sitting on a tree branch. Did you say piglet or thistle? The cat asked. I said piggy, answered Alice. And let's see if you stop walking, appearing and disappearing so suddenly. It gives me vertigo. All right, said the cat. And this time it disappeared slowly, very gently, starting with the tip of the tail and ending with the smile, which remained there for a while, when the rest of the cat had already disappeared. Wow, said Alicia. I have seen many times a cat without a smile, but a smile without a cat. I have seen a lot of times a cat without a smile. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. It didn't take long to get to the March hare house. He thought it had to be that house, for the chimneys were shaped like long ears and the roof was covered with fur. It was such a big house that he did not dare to approach without first giving a nibble on the mushroom piece of his left hand, with which it grew to a height of about 2 palmos. Yet she approached with some suspicion, as she said to herself, what if she was really mad? I'm starting to think maybe it would have been better to go see the Hatter. Chapter 7. A luncheon of crazy. They had set the table under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea. Sitting among them was a Lyron, who slept deeply, and the other two made him serve as a pillow, leaning his elbows on him, and speaking above his head. Very uncomfortable for the Lyron, thought Alice. But since he is asleep, I suppose he doesn't mind. The table was very large, but the three were tightly packed at one end. There is no room. They started to scream when they saw that Alicia was approaching. There is a lot of room. Alicia protested indignant, and sat down in a large chair at one end of the table. Take some wine, encouraged her the March Hare. Alicia looked all over the table, but there was only tea. I don't see any wine, she observed. Of course. There is none, said the March Hare. In such a case, it is not very correct of her to offer, said Alicia, angry. It is not very right of you to sit with us without being invited, said the March Hare. He didn't know the table was his, said Alicia. It's set for many more than 3 people. You need a good haircut, said the Hatter. He had been watching Alice with great curiosity, and these were his first words. You should learn not to make such personal remarks, said Alice with acrimony. It is very rude. Upon hearing this, the Hatter opened his eyes like oranges, but all he said was, How does a raven look like a desk? Wow, looks like we're going to have fun, thought Alicia. I love that you've started playing charades. And he added loudly, I think I know the solution. You mean you think you can find the solution? Asked the March Hare. Exactly, answered Alicia. Then you must say what you think, continued the March Hare. I already do, hastened to reply Alicia. Or at least I think what I say. It's the same, isn't it? The same? No way, said the Hatter. And in such a case, it would be the same to say I see what I eat as I see what I see. And it would be the same to say, added the March Hare, I like what I have that I have what I like. And it would be the same to say, added the Lyron, who seemed to speak in the midst of his dreams, I breathe when I sleep that I sleep when I breathe. It is the same in your case, said the Hatter. And here the conversation was interrupted, and the small group remained silent for a few moments, while Alicia tried to remember everything she knew about crows and desks, which was not too much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. What day of the month is it? He asked, addressing Alice. He had taken the watch out of his pocket, and looked at it anxiously, giving him violent jolts, and taking it over and over to his ear. Alicia reflected for a moment. It's day 4, she said at last. 2 days of error. The Hatter moaned, and turning bitterly to the March Hare, added, I told you that butter would not suit the machinery. It was the best butter, replied the Hare. Yes, but some crumbs must have been put in too, grunted the Hatter. You shouldn't have used the bread knife. The March Hare took the clock and looked at it with a melancholy air, then she dipped it in her cup of tea, and looked at it again. But he had nothing better to say and repeated his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over the shoulder of the Hare with quite a bit of curiosity. What a strange watch, she exclaimed. It marks the day of the month, and does not mark the time that is. And why should I? Scoffed the Hatter. Does your watch mark the year we are in? Of course not, Alicia promptly acknowledged. But this is because it's so long within the same year. Which is precisely what happens to mine, said the Hatter. Alicia was completely disconcerted. The Hatter's words seemed to have no meaning. I don't quite understand, he said as kindly as he could. The Shiner has gone to sleep again, said the Hatter, and poured some hot tea into his snout. The Lyron shook his head with impatience, and said, without opening his eyes, Of course yes. That's exactly what I was going to say. Have you found the answer to the riddle? Asked the Hatter, addressing again Alice. No. I give up. What is the solution? I have no idea, said the Hatter. Nor do I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed annoyingly. I think you could find a better way to kill time, he said, than to go on proposing riddles without solution. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you would not speak of killing it. Time is a character. Don't know what you mean, said Alicia. Of course you don't, said the Hatter, wrinkling his nose in a gesture of contempt. I'm sure you've never even spoken to time. I don't think so, Alicia replied cautiously. But in music class I have to beat the time. Ah, that explains it all, said the Hatter. Time does not tolerate being patted on the wrist. If you were in good relations with it, it would do whatever you wanted with the watch. For example, suppose it is 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to start classes, because you would have no more than whisper your desire to time, and time in a blink of an eye would turn the hands of your watch. 1:30. Time for lunch. How I would like it to be now, the March Hare said to herself in a whisper. It would be great, of course, said Alice, pensive. But then you wouldn't be hungry yet, would you? Perhaps you were not hungry at first, said the Hatter. But you could make it stay at 1:30 as long as you want. Is this what you do with time? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head with regret. Not me, he replied. We fought last March, just before she went crazy, you know, and pointed with the spoon towards the March Hare. Ah, yeah? Asked Alicia, interested. Yes. It happened during the great concert that offered the Queen of Hearts, and in which I was called to sing. What did you sing? Asked Alice. I sang, Shine, shine, winged rat, what are you so busy with? Because you know that song, don't you? It may sound familiar to me, but I'm not sure, said Alicia. It has more stanzas, the Hatter continued. For example, over the universe you are flying, with a tray of teapots carrying. It shines, it shines. At this point, the Lyron shuddered and began to hum in dreams, shines, 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 shines. And it was so long that they had to give him a good pinch to shut up. Well, the Hatter continued to tell his story. The truth is that I had just finished the first stanza, when the Queen began to shout, What a stupid way of killing time. They'll let him have his head cut off. What a barbarity! What a ferocity! Exclaimed Alice. And since then, the Hatter added in a very sad voice, Time thinks I wanted to kill him and does not want to do anything for me. Now it is always 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Alicia suddenly understood everything that was happening there. Is this the reason that there are so many tea parties on the table? He asked. Yes, it is the reason, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we don't have time to wash the dishes between teas. And what you do is go around to the table, right? Asked Alicia. Exactly, the Hatter admitted, as we are dirtying the cups. But what happens when they get back to the front of the table? Alice dared ask. What if we change the conversation? March's Hare interrupted them with a yawning dash. I'm fed up with this whole affair. I propose that this lady tell us a story. Very much I fear that I know none, said Alice, alarmed by this proposition. Well, let the Lyron do it. The Hatter and the March Hare exclaimed. Wake up, Lyron! And they began to pinch him one on each side. The Lyron slowly opened his eyes. He was not asleep, he said in a hoarse and weak voice. I have been listening to everything you have said, friends. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please, Alice begged. And hurry up, added the Hatter. Don't go to sleep again before you finish. Once upon a time 3 little sisters began hastily the Lyron dash, and they were called Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and lived in the bottom of a well. And what did they feed on? Asked Alicia, who was always very interested in everything that she would eat and drink. They were feeding on molasses, replied the Lyron, after a few seconds of reflection. They could not have been fed on molasses, he knows, said Alice kindly. They would have become very sick. And so it was, said the Lyron. They got very sick. Alicia made an effort to imagine what it would be like to live in such an extraordinary way. But she could not see it clearly, so she kept asking, but why did they live at the bottom of a well? Have some more tea, offered the March Hare. So far I have not taken anything, Alicia protested in an offended tone, so that I cannot take any more. You mean you can't take less, the Hatter said. It's much easier to take more than anything. Nobody asked her opinion, said Alicia. Who is making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked in a triumphant tone. Alice did not know what to say. So, he chose to serve himself some tea and bread with butter. And then he turned to the Lyron and repeated the same question. Why did they live in the bottom of a well? The Lyron began to mull again for a minute or two, and then said, it was a well of molasses. There is no such thing. Alice had spoken with energy, but the Hatter and the March Hare silenced her with their CHST. CHST, while the Lyron grumbled indignantly, if you do not know how to behave with education, better be you finish the story. No, please continue, Alicia said in a humble tone. I will not interrupt you again. There may indeed be one of these wells. Of course there is, exclaimed the Lyron in indignation. But he was nevertheless ready to go on with the tale. So, our three little sisters were learning to draw, taking out. What did they take out? Asked Alicia, who had already forgotten her promise. Malaysia, answered the Lyron, without taking time to reflect this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move somewhere. He changed his chair while he was speaking, and the March Hare followed him. The March Hare took the place of the March Hare, and Alice reluctantly took the seat of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who was winning with the change, and Alice was much worse off than before, because the March Hare had just spilled milk into her plate. Alicia did not want to offend the Lyron again, so she began to speak with great prudence. But I do not understand. Where did they get the molasses? One can draw water from a well of water, said the Hatter. Why will not he be able to draw molasses from a well of molasses? Don't be stupid. But they were inside, deep inside, said Alice to the Lyron, not wanting to be aware of the last words of the Hatter. Of course they were, said the Lyron. They were most demanded. Alice was so confused to see that the Lyron had understood something different from what she meant, that she did not interrupt him for a little while. Our three little sisters were learning to draw, then the Lyron continued, yawning and rubbing his eyes, because he was getting a terrible dream. And they drew all sorts of things, everything that begins with the letter M. Why with the M? Asked Alicia. Why not? Asked the March Hare. Alice kept silent. By then, the Lyron had closed his eyes and began to nod. But with the pinch of the Hatter, he woke up again, let out a cry and followed the narration. What begins with the letter M, like rat poison, world, memory and much, very, in short all those things. Much I say, because you know, like when you say, a lot more than a lot less. Have you ever seen the drawing of a lot? Now that you asked me, said Alicia, who was feeling terribly confused, I must admit that I don't think. If you don't think, shut up, interrupted the Hatter. This last rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She rose up very upset and walked away from there. The Lyron fell asleep on the spot, and none of the others gave any sign that they had noticed his departure, though Alice looked back once or twice, almost expecting to be called. The last time he saw them they were trying to put the Lyron into the teapot. For nothing in the world will I ever put my feet there again, Alice said as she went into the forest. It's the stupidest snack I've ever been to in my life. As he said these words, he discovered that one of the trees had a door in the trunk. What a strange thing, he thought. But everything is strange today. I think it's best if you go in right away. And he went into the tree. Once again, he found himself in the large hall, very close to the glass table. This time I will do things much better, she said to herself. And she started by taking the little golden lamp and opening the door that led to the garden. Then he began to nibble carefully on the mushroom. He had kept a piece in his pocket, until he measured just over a palm. Then he entered the narrow passage. And then it was finally in the wonderful garden, among the multicolored flowers and fresh fountains. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet. A large rose tree stood near the entrance to the garden. Its roses were white, but there were 3 gardeners busy painting them red. Alice found it very strange, and she came to find out what was going on, and as she approached them she heard one of the gardeners say, "Be careful, Cinco. 5 don't splash me with paint like that." It's not my fault, said 5, in a pained tone. 7 has struck me in the elbow. 7 raised his eyes, to which he said, very nice. 5. Always blame others. You'd better shut up. 5 said Cinco. Yesterday I heard the Queen say that your head should be cut off. Why? Asked the one who had spoken in the first place. That's none of your business, too, said 7. It is his business, protested 5. And I'm going to tell you. It was for bringing the cooked tulip bulbs instead of onions. 7 threw the brush to the ground and was beginning to say, wow, of all the injustices, when his eyes casually fixed on Alice, who was there watching them, and he fell silent in the act. The other 2 turned to her, and all 3 made a deep bow. Would you please tell me, Alicia began with a certain shyness, why are these roses being painted? 5 and 7 said nothing, but they looked at 2. 2 began in a trembling voice. Well, you see, miss, the fact is that this was to have been a red rose, and we planted a white one by mistake, and if the Queen finds out, they will cut off our heads, you know. So, you see, miss, we're doing everything we can before she gets here too. At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking out over the garden, shouted, The Queen! The Queen! And the 3 gardeners immediately threw themselves face down into the ground. There was a noise of many steps, and Alice looked around, eager to see the Queen. 10 soldiers first appeared, brandishing clubs. They were the same shape as the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with hands and feet in the corners. Then followed 10 courtiers, entirely adorned with diamonds, and formed, like the soldiers, 2 by 2. Then the royal infants came. There were also 10, and they advanced leaping, holding hands 2 by 2, adorned with hearts. Then followed the guests, almost all kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the White Rabbit. He spoke with a flurry of nervousness, smiling without tone or sound, and did not notice the presence of the girl. Next came the Valet of Hearts, who carried the crown of the king on a crimson velvet cushion. And at the end of this splendid procession, the king and the Queen of Hearts advanced. Alicia was wondering whether or not to lie down like the 3 gardeners, but she did not remember ever hearing one do that when a parade passed. And also, he thought, what would be the point of a parade, if everyone had to lie down on their faces, so that they could not see anything? So she stood still where she was, and waited. When the cortege reached Alice's height, all stopped and looked at her, and the Queen asked sternly, Who is this? The question was addressed to the Valet of Hearts, but the valet did nothing but bow and smile at every answer. Idiot! The Queen said, shaking her head with impatience, and turning to Alice, asked, What is your name, child? My name is Alice, to serve Her Majesty, replied Alice in a most courteous tone, but added to herself, Well, at the end of the day, they are nothing more than a deck of cards. I don't have to be scared. And who are these? The Queen continued to ask, as she pointed out the 3 gardeners lying around the rose bush. Because, of course, being on their faces only the back was seen, which was the same in all the cards of the deck, and the Queen could not know if they were gardeners, or soldiers, or courtiers, or 3 of her own children. How should I know? Replied Alice, amazed at her own boldness. It's not my business. The Queen blushed with fury, and after giving her a fierce look, she began to shout, Let him have his head cut off. Let him be cut off. Nonsense! Exclaimed Alice, in a very loud and determined voice. And the Queen fell silent. The King put his hand on her arm, and said shyly, Consider, dear, that it is only a girl. The Queen let go of him angrily, and said to the valet, Turn these. And so did the valet, very carefully, with 1 foot. Up! The Queen shouted, in a loud and detonating voice. And the 3 gardeners stood up leaping, and began to make deep bows to the King, the Queen, the royal children, the valet, and everyone. Enough! Cried the Queen. You're making me nervous. And then, turning to the rose bush, he continued, What the hell have you been doing here? With the permission of His Majesty, he began to explain too in a very humble tone, and prostrating a knee on the floor as he spoke, We were trying, I see it, burst the Queen, who had been examining the roses, let them cut off their heads. And the procession set again, though 3 soldiers stood there to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to take refuge with Alice. "They will not cut off your head," said Alice, and put them in a large pot that was nearby. The 3 soldiers spent a few minutes walking around, looking for the gardeners, and then left quietly behind the procession. "Have their heads been lost?" cried the Queen. "Yes, their heads have been lost," with Her Majesty's permission, the soldiers shouted in response. "Very good," cried the Queen. "Do you know how to play croquet?" The soldiers kept silent, and turned their eyes to Alice, for it was evident that the question was addressed to her. "Yes," Alice cried. "Well, let go," the Queen cried. And Alice joined the procession, wondering with great curiosity what was to happen next. "It's a splendid day," whispered a shy little voice. Alice was walking beside the White Rabbit, who looked at her anxiously. "Much," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Chithin. Cheatone," said the Rabbit in a low and pressing voice. He looked anxiously at her back as she spoke, and then he tiptoed, put his snout to Alice's ear and whispered, "She has been sentenced to death." "For what reason?" asked Alice. "Did you say poor girl?" the Rabbit asked. "No, I have not said that. I do not think it is any poor girl." He said, "For what reason?" He gave the Queen a slap, began to say the Rabbit, and Alice gave a laugh. "Kyton! Kyton!" the Rabbit begged in a frightened little voice. "The Queen will hear you." The Duchess arrived quite late, and the Queen said, "All to your places!" cried the Queen with a voice of thunder. And they all ran in every direction, stumbling on each other. However, a few minutes later they took their seats, and the match began. Alicia thought she had never seen a croquet field as rare as that in her life. It was full of mounds and grooves. The balls were living hedgehogs, the mallets were living flamingos, and the soldiers had to bend over and get on all fours to form the rings. The most serious difficulty that Alicia encountered at first was to handle her flamenco. He managed to dominate the bird by putting it under his arm, with the legs hanging behind him, but almost always, when he had managed to straighten his long neck and was about to give a good blow to the hedgehog with the head of the flamingo, he twisted his neck and looked right into her eyes with such astonishment that Alice could not contain herself. And when she had lowered her head again and was ready to start over, it was very irritating to find that the hedgehog had untangled and crawled away. As if all this were not enough, there was always a mound or a groove in the direction she wanted to throw the hedgehog, and as the soldiers folded into a hoop did not stop to mount up and leave for other points of the field, Alicia soon concluded that it was a really difficult game. The players played all at once, without waiting their turn, arguing endlessly and disputing the hedgehogs. And shortly the Queen had fallen into a paroxysm of fury and walked from side to side, kicking on the ground and shouting at every moment, "Let this one's head be cut off! Oh, let this one's head be cut off!" Alicia began to feel uncomfortable. She had not yet had a quarrel with the Queen, but she knew it could happen at any moment. "And then," I thought, "what will become of me? Here they arrange everything by cutting off heads. The strange thing is that there is still someone alive." He was looking for some way to escape, and wondering if he could leave without being seen, when he noticed a strange appearance in the air. At first she was very puzzled, but after watching her for a few minutes, she discovered that it was a smile, and said, "It is the Cheshire Cat. Now I will have someone to talk to." "How are you?" said the cat, as soon as he had enough snout to talk. Alicia waited until the eyes appeared, and then waved to him. It will be of no use to speak to him, he thought, until he has ears, or at least one of them. A minute later the whole head had appeared, and then Alicia left her flamenco on the floor and began to tell what happened in the game, very happy to have someone who listened. The cat certainly believed that his visible part was enough, and nothing else appeared. "It seems to me that they don't play a bit clean," began Alicia in a moaning tone, "and they fight in such a terrible way that there is no one who understands, and there doesn't seem to be any rules. And if there are, nobody listens to them. And you can't imagine what a mess it is that things are alive. For example, there goes the hoop that I was playing right now, just across the field. And I would have given him the Queen's hedgehog right now, but he left when he saw mine coming. What do you think of the Queen? Cat said in a low voice. I don't like it at all, said Alice. It's so exaggerated. At this moment, Alice noticed that the Queen was right behind her, listening to what she said, so she continued so overzealously determined to win, that it is not worth finishing the game. The Queen smiled and resumed her way. Who are you talking to? The King asked, approaching Alice and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. He is a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat, said Alice. Allow me to present it. I do not like its appearance, the King said. However, you may kiss my hand if you wish. I prefer not to do it, the cat confessed. Don't be impertinent, said the King, and don't look at me like this. And he took refuge behind Alice as she spoke. A cat can look a king face to face, Alicia said. I read it in a book, but I don't remember which one. Well, then it must be removed, said the King with decision, and called the Queen, who was just passing by. Dear, I would like you to eliminate this cat. For the Queen there was only one way to solve problems, big or small. May her head be cut off, he ordered, without even bothering to glance at them. I myself will go and fetch the executioner, said the King hastily. And he ran away from there. Alicia thought it would be better for her to go back into the game and find out how the game was going, as she heard the Queen's voice in the distance, howling with fury. He had just handed down a death sentence against 3 of the players, for not playing when it was their turn. And Alicia did not like the look that it was taking all, because the game had reached such a point of confusion that it was impossible to know when it was his turn to play and when not. So he started to find his hedgehog. The hedgehog had got into a fight with another hedgehog, and this seemed to Alicia an excellent opportunity to make a carambola. The only difficulty was that his flamingo had gone off to the other end of the garden, and Alicia could see him there, flapping awkwardly in an attempt to fly into the branches of a tree. When he had recovered his flamingo and returned to him, the fight was over, and no trace of any of the hedgehogs was seen. But this is not too important, thought Alice, since all the hoops have left this side of the field. So, he held the flamingo under his arm well, so that it would not escape again, and went to chat a little more with his friend. When she returned to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to see that a large group of people had gathered around her. The executioner, the King and Queen were arguing violently, talking to each other at once, while the others were silent and seemed very uncomfortable. As soon as Alice entered the scene, the 3 approached her to decide the matter, and gave her their arguments. But, as they all spoke at once, it was very difficult for him to understand exactly what they were saying. The executioner's theory was that it was impossible to cut off a head if there was no body from which to cut it. He said he had never had to do anything like this in the past, and would not start doing it at this point in his life. The King's theory was that everything with a head could be beheaded, and that he would stop talking nonsense. The Queen's theory was that if they did not solve the problem immediately, she would have her people cut off their heads. It was this last threat that made everyone look serious and scared. Alicia only thought to say, "The cat is of the Duchess. It would be best to ask her what should be done with it." "The Duchess is in prison," said the Queen to the executioner. "Go and fetch her." And the executioner left like an arrow. The cat's head began to fade from the moment the executioner left, and when he returned with the Duchess it had completely disappeared. So the King and the executioner began to run around in search of the cat, while the rest of the group returned to the croquet game. Chapter 9. The Story of the False Turtle. "You don't know how glad I am to see you again, my dear," said the Duchess, as she lovingly took Alice by the arm and took her for a walk. Alicia was glad to find her in such a good mood, and thought to herself that it might be only the pepper that had made her mad when they met in the kitchen. "When I am a duchess," he said, though not with too many hopes of becoming one, "I will have no pepper in my kitchen. The soup is very good without pepper. It is perhaps the pepper that makes people grumpy," he continued, thinking, very happy to have made a new discovery, "and vinegar what makes people sour, and chamomile what makes them bitter, and licorice and sweets what makes children sweet. If only people knew." Then they wouldn't be so stingy with the sweets. Meanwhile, Alice had almost forgotten the Duchess, and was a little shocked when she heard her voice very close to her ear. "You're thinking something, dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I cannot tell you at this moment the moral of this, but I will recall it immediately." "Perhaps I have no moral," he dared to observe Alicia. Shut up, creature," said the Duchess. "Everything has a moral, only need to know how to find it." And he pressed closer against Alice as she spoke. Alice did not like to have her so close, first, because the Duchess was very ugly, and second, because she had exactly the right stature to support her chin on Alice's shoulder, and it was a sharp chin of the most unpleasant. However, as she did not like to be rude, she endured it as best she could. "The game is now going a little better," he said, in an attempt to resume the conversation. "That's right," the Duchess said, "and the moral of it is, oh, love. Love makes the world go round." One person said, Alicia scoffed, that the world would turn better if everyone took care of their own affairs. "Well, good. It is the same," said the Duchess, and she sank her pointed chin a little further into Alice's shoulder when she added, "And the moral of this is—" "What a mania to look for a moral for everything," thought Alicia. "I think you're surprised that your arm doesn't go through your waist," said the Duchess after a few moments of silence. "The reason is that I have my doubts about the character of your flamenco. Do you want me to try the experiment?" "Maybe he gives it a peck," replied Alicia, who was not the least willing to try the experiment. "It's true," the Duchess acknowledged. "Flamingos and mustard sting. And the moral of this is, birds of equal plumage make good pairing." "Only that mustard is not a bird," observed Alice. "You are quite right," said the Duchess. "How clearly you ask questions." "It is a mineral, I think," said Alice. "Of course it is," agreed the Duchess, who seemed willing to agree with everything that Alice said. "There's a big mustard mine near here. And the moral of it is—" "Ah, I remember!" exclaimed Alicia, who had not paid attention to this last comment. "It is a vegetable. It does not look like one, but it is." "Entirely in agreement," said the Duchess. "And the moral of it is, I know what you want to see more. If you want me to say it in a simpler way, never imagine being different from what you might seem or would have seemed to others if they had thought that you were not what you are." "It seems to me that I would understand this better," said Alicia kindly, "if I saw it written down, but as you say, I cannot follow the thread. This is nothing compared to what I could say if I wanted to," the Duchess said proudly. "Please don't bother saying it in a longer way," Alice pleaded. "Oh, don't talk of inconvenience," said the Duchess. "I gladly give you all the things I have said so far." "What a gift," thought Alicia. "Thank goodness there are no such birthday gifts." But she didn't dare to say it out loud. "Thinking again?" asked the Duchess, and sank her sharp chin a little further into Alicia's shoulder. "I have a right to think, don't I?" Alice replied with acrimony, because she was beginning to get fed up with the Duchess. "Exactly the same right," said the Duchess, "that the one that have the pigs to fly, and the mora." But at this point, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess's voice was lost in a whisper, precisely in the middle of her favorite word, moral, and the arm with which she had taken Alicia began to tremble. Alice looked up, and saw the Queen standing before them, arms crossed and a stormy brow. "Beautiful day, Majesty," began the Duchess in a low and trembling voice. "Now let's get things straight," roared the Queen, kicking the floor as she spoke. "Either you or your head must disappear from the map." The Queen, and in less than a cock sings. "Choose." The Duchess chose, and disappeared in haste. "And now let us return to the game," said the Queen to Alice. Alice was too scared to say, "This mouth is mine," but she docile followed the Queen to the croquet field. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence, and had laid down in the shade, but as soon as they saw her, they hurried back to the game, while the Queen merely pointed out that a second delay would cost them their lives. The whole time they were playing, the Queen did not stop fighting with the other players, nor did she stop shouting, "Cut off this one's head, oh let this one's head be cut off." Those he condemned were placed under the watch of soldiers, who naturally had to stop making rings, so that after half an hour there was not a single ring left, and all the players except the king, the queen and Alice were arrested and under death sentence. Then the queen left the game, almost breathless, and asked Alice, "Have you seen the false turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a false turtle is." "Have you ever eaten turtle soup?" asked the queen. "There is another soup that looks like turtle, but it's not real turtle. The false turtle serves to make this soup." "I have never seen any, nor heard of it," said Alice. "Go," ordered the queen, "and the false turtle will tell you her story." As they were leaving together, Alice heard the king say in a low voice to the whole group, "You are all forgiven." "Wow, that's good," Alice was told, that she felt very uneasy about the large number of executions that the queen had ordered. Soon they came to a griffin, who was lying deep asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the drawing. "Up, lazy," the queen ordered, "and accompany this lady to see the false turtle and hear her story. I have to go back to watch a few executions that I've ordered." And he walked away, leaving Alicia alone with the griffin. Alice did not like the look of that bug, but she thought that, after all, she might be safer if she stayed with him than if she went back with the queen's basilisk. So he waited. The griffin stood up and rubbed his eyes. Then he stared at the queen until she lost sight of her. Then he uttered a mocking laugh. "The Griffo, it's funny," said the griffin, half to himself, half addressing Alice. "What is it that's funny?" asked Alice. She answered the griffin. "It's all her fantasies. They never execute anyone, you know." "Come on. Here everyone gives orders," thought Alice, as she followed him reluctantly. I had not received so many orders in my life. Never. They had not walked much when they saw the false turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on a rock, and as she approached, Alice could hear her sigh as if her heart were breaking. He was very sorry. "What misfortune has happened to him?" asked the griffin. And the griffin answered, almost in the same words as before, "It's all his fantasies. No misfortune has happened to him, you know. Come on." So they came to the false turtle, who looked at them with her big eyes full of tears, but said nothing. "Here, this lady explained, the griffin wants to know your story." "I will tell it to them," said the false turtle in a low and whiny voice. "Sit down, both of you, and say not a word until I have finished." They sat down, and for a few minutes no one spoke. Alicia said to herself, "I don't understand how she can finish her story, if she doesn't decide to start it." But she waited patiently. "There was a time," said the false turtle at last, with a deep sigh, "when I was a real turtle." These words were followed by a very long silence, broken only by the griffin's squeal and the constant sobs of the false turtle. Alicia was about to get up and say, "Thank you very much, ma'am, for your interesting story," but she could not help thinking that she had to follow something else, so she sat down and said nothing. "When we were little," the false turtle finally continued, a little more quiet, but unable to contain any groan, "we went to the school of the sea. The teacher was an old turtle whom we called Talpago." "Why was it called turtle, if it wasn't a turtle?" asked Alicia. "We called it Torpego because he was always saying that he had to gala teach in a school of pay," explained the false turtle in a bad mood. "You really are a pretty silly girl. You should be ashamed of yourself for asking such obvious things," the griffin added. And the griffin and the false turtle sat silently, looking at poor Alice, who would have wanted to be swallowed by the earth. Finally the griffin said to the false turtle, "Keep up your story, dear. We're not going to spend the day on this." And the false turtle continued with these words, "Yes, we were going to the school of the sea, even if you don't believe it." "Never said I didn't believe it," Alicia interrupted her. "Yes, you did," said the false turtle. "Shut up," added the griffin, before Alicia could speak again. The false turtle continued, "We were given a perfect education. Actually, we went to school every day." "I also go to school every day," said Alicia. "There's no reason to brag so much." "A school with special classes?" the false turtle asked with some anxiety. "Yes," Alice replied. "We have special classes in French and music." "And washing?" the false turtle asked. "Of course not," protested Alice indignantly. "Ah, In such a case you do not actually go to a good school, said the false turtle in a tone of relief. In our school there were special classes of French, music and washing. They must have been of no use to him, Alice observed, living at the bottom of the sea. I had no opportunity to learn, said the false turtle with a sigh. I only attended the normal classes. And what were those? Asked Alicia, interested. They taught us to drink and spit, naturally. And then the various subjects of arithmetic, smoking, raving, writing and especially resignation. I never heard of Fifikar, Alice replied. The griffin stood on 2 legs, very astonished. How? Did you never learn to Fifikar? At least you know what beautify means. Well, that means to do something more beautiful than it is. Well, replied the griffin triumphantly, if you don't know now what it means to be a fool, then you are completely foolish. With which closed the mouth to Alicia, who no longer dared to ask what things meant. He said to the false turtle, what else did you learn there? Well, I learned hysteria, ancient and modern hysteria. Also mariography, and drawing. The teacher was a conger who came to teach us once a week and taught us that, plus other things, like die to the bolio. What is that? Asked Alicia. I can't show you, because I'm too low now, replied the false turtle. And the griffin, as he himself can tell you, never learned to dye oil. I never had enough time, the griffin excused. But I did go to the letters class. And we had a teacher who was a great teacher, an old crab. I never went to his classes, said the false turtle whimpering. They say he taught skate and watering. Yes, he did, answered the griffin. And the two covered their heads with their feet, very agitated. How many hours a day were these lessons? Alicia asked, interested, although she could not understand much what were those subjects so rare, or if they did not know how to pronounce. Tincture to the bolio should be oil painting, and skate and irrigation would be Latin and Greek. But what is the others? He escaped. We had 10 hours a day on the first day. Then, the second day, 9 and so on. Well, it seems to me a very strange schedule, the girl remarked. That's why they were called courses. You don't understand anything. Courses were called because they were shortened from day to day. That was new to Alicia, and before she asked a new question, she gave it some thought. Finally he asked, so, the 11th day would be a feast, of course. Of course, answered the false turtle. And the 12th? No more courses now, ordered the griffin authoritatively. Tell him something about the games now. Chapter 10. The Lobster Dance. The false turtle sighed deeply and wiped a tear with its fin. Before he spoke, he looked at Alice for quite some time, as the sobs almost drowned her. You have a choke bone, it seems, said the disrespectful griffin. And he began to beat her on the shell from behind. Finally the turtle regained her voice and resumed her narration. Only tears were slipping down her old wrinkled face. You haven't lived long at the bottom of the sea. Certainly not, said Alicia. And you may never have come in contact with a lobster. Alicia began to say, I once ate. But she was interrupted in a hurry if anyone felt offended. No, never, he replied. Well then, you have no idea how pleasant the lobster ball is. No, Alicia said. What kind of dance is this? You will see, said the griffin. First a line forms along the beach. Dash 2 lines, cried the false turtle. Seals, turtles, and so on. Then, when all the jellyfish have been removed from the middle, which usually takes quite a long time, interrupted the griffin. Dash 2 steps to the front, each with a pair of lobster, cried the griffin. Of course, said the false turtle. 2 steps forward, pairs form, dash, change from lobster, and back in the same order, continued the griffin. Then, the false turtle continued, the locusts are launched, exclaimed the griffin with enthusiasm, jumping in the air. Dash, as far as you can in the sea, and swim after them, screamed the griffin. It's a somersault into the sea, the false turtle cried, clapping in enthusiasm. He changes again from lobster. The griffin howled. He returned to the beach, and here ends the first figure, said the false turtle, as his voice suddenly lowered. And the 2 creatures, who had been jumping and writhing during the whole explanation, sat down again very sad and quiet, and looked at Alice. It must be a beautiful dance, said Alicia shyly. Would you like to see how it is danced? Proposed the false turtle. Sure, I would like it very much, said Alice. Let's try the first figure, said the false turtle to the griffin. We can do it without lobsters, you know. Who's going to sing? You will sing, said the griffin. I forgot the lyrics. They then began to dance solemnly around Alice, stomping her every time they got too close and carrying the compass with their front legs, while the false turtle sang slowly and melancholy. Why don't you move faster? I ask a snail for a whiting. Because I have a dolphin behind me, stepping on my heel. Look how happy the lobsters and turtles get when they walk. They wait for us on the beach. Come on. Dance and let go. Come on, dance, come on, dance, come on, dance and let yourself go. Dance, come on, dance, come on, dance, come on, let yourself go. You can't imagine how nice the dance is when we are thrown with the lobsters into the sea. But the snail always replied, too far, and didn't even bother to look. Didn't want to dance, didn't want to dance, didn't want to dance. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting dance, said Alicia, when she saw with relief that the dance was over. And I really like this song about the goldfish. Oh, about the goldfish, said the false turtle. The goldfish are. Well, I suppose you have already seen some. Yes, replied Alicia Dash, I've often seen them in its But he held himself in time and kept silent. What is that about, said the false turtle, but if you have seen them so often, you will know naturally how they are. I think so, Alice replied thoughtfully. They carry their tails into their mouths and are covered with breadcrumbs. You are wrong about the bread, said the false turtle. In the sea the breadcrumbs would disappear immediately. But it is true that they carry the tail inside the mouth, and the reason is... At this point the false turtle yawned and closed his eyes. Tell him the reason for all this, he added, addressing the griffin. The reason is, said the griffin, that the little fish want to participate with the lobsters in the dance. And therefore they throw them into the sea. And therefore they have to go as far as possible. And therefore they catch their tails with their mouths. And therefore they can't then take them out again. That's it. Thank you, said Alicia. It's very interesting. I have never known so much about the goldfish. Well, I can tell you more about them, said the griffin. Do you know why the little fish are white? No, and I've never asked myself, really, why are they white? Because they are used to shine shoes and boots, so, for white they are, answered the griffin, very satisfied. Alicia remained amazed, with her mouth open. To shine, she repeated, stunned. Dash. I do not explain it. But sure. See? How do you clean your shoes? Come on, how do you shine them? Alice looked at her feet, pensive, and hesitated before giving a logical explanation. With black bitumen, I think. Under the sea, shoes are given a whitish white, replied the griffin. Now you know. And what are they made of? Of grouper and other fish. Come on, man, if any shrimp would know the answer to that question, answered the griffin with impatience. If I had been a goldfish, I would have said to the dolphin, please leave, because we do not wish to be with you. Alicia said, thinking of a verse from the song. No, answered the false turtle. They had no choice but to be with him, since there is no fish that is respected who does not want to be accompanied by a dolphin. Is that so? Alicia asked, very surprised. Of course not, replied the false turtle. If a fish approached me and told me that he was going on a journey, I would first ask him, and which dolphin are you with? Alice remained pensive. Then he ventured, it would not be really what I said to him. For what purpose? Say what I say. The turtle assailed. And now, said the griffin to Alice, tell us some of your adventures. I can tell you my adventures, from this morning, said Alice with a certain shyness. But it would be no use going back to yesterday, because yesterday I was someone else. That's gibberish. Explain all this, said the false turtle. Yes, no. The adventures first, exclaimed the griffin with impatience. The explanations take too much time. So Alicia began to tell her adventures from the moment she first saw the white rabbit. At first she was a little nervous, because the two creatures clung to her, one on each side, with eyes and mouths open like oranges. but she gained courage as she went along in her story. His listeners kept complete silence until the moment came when he had recited to the caterpillar the poem of Has Aged, Father Guillermo, which in reality had turned out very different from what it was. At this point, the false turtle sighed deeply and said, "All that seems very curious to me." "It cannot be more curious," said the griffin. "You were so different," repeated the turtle, "that I would like you to recite something for us now." He turned to the griffin. "Tell him to start." The griffin indicated, "Stand up and recite that. It's the voice of the sloth." "But how many orders do these creatures give me?" said Alice in a low voice. "It seems as if they are making me repeat the lessons. For this I would be in school." But he stood up and began to recite the poem. Meanwhile, he kept spinning the lobster dance in his head and actually knew barely what he was saying. And so it turned out that he recited, "The voice of the lobster I have heard declare, they have roasted me too much, and now I will have to put sugar in. The same as the duck does with its eyelids, the lobster does with its nose. Tighten the belt and button up while twisting the ankles. When the sand is dry he is happy as a partridge, and speaks with contempt of the shark. But when the tide rises and the sharks surround it, his voice breaks and he only knows how to mumble." Griffo said, "This is not how I heard it when I was a child. It turns out to be different." "It may be, although the truth is that I have never heard that poem," said the false turtle dash. "But the case is that it sounds like nonsense." Alicia did not answer. He covered his face with his hands, then sat down again and wondered if it would be possible that nothing could happen there in a natural way. "Let's see, I would like to hear a logical explanation," said the false turtle. "He doesn't know how to explain it," intervened the griffin. "But well, he continues with the following stanza." "But," insisted the turtle dash, "what about the ankles? How could he twist them with his nose?" "This is the first position of the whole dance," said Alicia, who, however, did not understand anything that was happening, and wished to change the subject of the conversation. "Continue with the following stanza," said the griffin. "If I'm not mistaken, it's the one that begins by saying, 'I passed through your garden.'" Alicia obeyed, though she was sure that everything would continue to be distorted. With a trembling voice he said, "I passed by his garden, and with one eye I could see very well how the owl and the panther were sharing a cake. The panther took the pasta, meat and filling, while the owl only had the cake. When they finished eating it, the owl only got the fountain containing the cake. When they finished eating it, the owl as a gift took in his pocket the teaspoon, while the panther, with knife and fork, ended the singular feast." "What I say," said the turtle, "is why do we need to recite and recite so much? If you don't explain the meaning of what you are saying, well, that's it. This is the most confusing thing I've ever heard in my life." "Of course," nodded the griffin dash. "I think it's best if you leave it." And Alicia was very happy. "Shall we try another lobster ball figure?" continued the griffin. "Or would you like the false turtle to sing you another song?" "Another song, please, if the false turtle would be so kind," exclaimed Alice, in such a hurry that the griffin was offended. "Go," murmured in a sore tone. "There is nothing written about tastes. Would you like to sing Sopa de Tortuga, my friend?" The false turtle sighed deeply and began to sing in a voice choked by the sobs, "Beautiful soup, in the soup, so green and rich, awaits us. It's exquisite, it's delicious. Soup at night, beautiful soup. Hermo, wussa su, whoopa. Hermo, wussa su, whoopa. Su, whoopa of the nooch. Beautiful Hermo. Sa soup." "Sing the second stanza," exclaimed the griffin. And the false turtle had just begun it, when a cry of judgment is opened was heard in the distance. "Come on," cried the griffin. And, holding Alice's hand, he ran away, without waiting for the end of the song. "What judgment is this?" Alice gasped as they ran. But the griffin simply replied, "Come on," and he ran even faster, while, increasingly weaker, dragged by the breeze that followed them, came the melancholy words, "Supa of Nuche, the beautiful, beautiful soup." Chapter 11. Who Stole the Pies? When they arrived, the King and the Queen of Hearts were seated on their thrones, and there was a great crowd gathered around them, all kinds of birds and animals. as well as the whole deck of cards. The valet stood before them, chained, with a soldier on each side to watch over him. And near the king was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll in the other. Right in the middle of the room was a table, and on top of it a large tray of pies. They looked so good that Alicia's mouth watered when she saw them. May the judgment end soon, he thought, and spread out the snack. But there didn't seem to be much of a chance, and Alicia started looking around to kill time. She had never been in a court of law, but she had read about them in books, and was very pleased to see that she knew the names of almost everything there. That is the judge, she said to herself, because he wears that big wig. The judge, by the way, was the king, and as he wore the crown over his wig, he did not seem to be very comfortable, and certainly did not look well. And that is the jury stand, thought Alice, and those 12 creatures, she was forced to say creatures, you know, because some were hairy animals and others were birds, I suppose are the members of the jury. He repeated this last word 2 or 3 times to himself, feeling proud of it, Alicia thought, and rightly so, that very few girls her age could know its meaning. The 12 jurors were busy writing on blackboards. What are they doing? Alice whispered to Griffo. They cannot have anything to write down now, before the trial has begun. They are writing down their names, the Griffin whispered in reply, lest they be forgotten before the end of the trial. Stupid little things, began to say Alicia in a loud and indignant voice. But he stopped quickly when he heard the white rabbit scream, silence in the room, and seeing the king put down his glasses and looked around him severely to find out who was the one who had spoken. Alicia could see, as if she was looking over her shoulders, that all the jury members were writing stupid little things on their blackboards, and he could even tell that one of them did not know how to write Bichejo and had to ask his neighbor. What a mess they will have made on their boards before the trial is over, thought Alice. One of the jurors had a crayons that squeaked. Of course this was something that Alicia could not bear, so she turned around the room, stood behind her, and found very soon an opportunity to take the chalk from her. He did so skillfully that the poor fellow, it was Bill, the lizard, did not realize at all what had happened to his chalk, and so, after searching for it everywhere, he was forced to write with a finger the rest of the day, and this was of no great use, because it did not leave any mark on the blackboard. Harold, read the accusation, said the king. And then the white rabbit gave 3 trumpet sounds, and unrolled the scroll, and read the following. The queen baked several cakes on a blue summer day. The valet took those cakes and took them to Istanbul. Consider your verdict, said the king to the jury. Not yet. Not yet. He hastily interrupted the rabbit. There are many other things before this. Call the first witness, said the king. And the rabbit gave 3 trumpet sounds and shouted, First witness. The first witness was the hatter. He appeared with a cup of tea in one hand and a piece of bread with butter in the other. Please forgive me, Majesty, he began, for bringing these things here, but I had not finished drinking tea when I was summoned to this trial. You should have finished, said the king. When did you start? The hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him there from the arm of the Lyron. I think it was on March 14th, on the 15th day, said the March Hare. On the 16th day, said the Lyron. Write all this down, ordered the king to the jury. And the members of the jury rushed to write down the 3 dates on their blackboards, and then added up the 3 figures and reduced the result to shillings and pence. Take off your hat, ordered the king to the hatter. It's not mine, Majesty, said the hat. Stolen hat, the king exclaimed, turning to the members of the jury, who immediately took note of the fact. I have them to sell, the hatter added as an explanation. None of them are mine. I am a hatter. At this point, the queen put her glasses down and began to examine the hatter severely, who became pale and trembled. Say what you have to declare, demanded the king, and do not get nervous, or I will execute you on the spot. This did not seem to cheer the witness at all. He leaned on one foot or on the other, looking restlessly at the queen, and it was such his confusion that he gave a tremendous bite to the cup of tea, believing it was bread with butter. At this very moment Alicia experienced a very strange sensation, which puzzled her terribly until she understood what it was. She had begun to grow again. At first he thought he should get up and leave the room, but he thought better of it and decided to stay where he was as long as his size allowed. "Please don't push so much," said the Lyron, who was sitting next to him. "I can barely breathe." "I cannot help it," Alice humbly replied. "I am growing up." "You have no right to grow up here," said the Lyron. Chapter 12. Alicia's statement. "Here I am," Alice cried. And forgetting, in the excitement of the moment, how much he had grown in the last few minutes, stood up with such haste that he struck the edge of his skirt on the jury bench, and all the members of the jury fell head over heels on top of the people below, and stood there kicking and wriggling. And this reminded Alice intensely of the goldfish bowl that she had accidentally overturned last week. "Alice, oh, please forgive me!" exclaimed Alice in a dismayed tone. And he began to lift them in a hurry, for he could not remove from his mind the accident of the fishbowl, and had the vague feeling that it was necessary to pick them up as soon as possible and return them to the stand, or else they would die. "The trial cannot continue," said the king in a very grave voice, "until all the members of the jury have duly taken their places." "All the members of the jury," he repeated with great emphasis, looking severely at Alice as he spoke these words. Alice looked towards the jury box, and saw that, in haste, she had placed the lizard upside down, and the poor little animal, unable to stand up, could do nothing but shake his tail melancholically. Alicia immediately picked him up and put him in the right position. "Although I don't think it will do much for him," she said to herself. "It seems to me that the judgment will not change at all by the fact that this little animal is on his feet, or on his head." As soon as the jury had recovered a little from the shock they had suffered, and had found and raised their chalks and slates again, they all set to write with great diligence to record the story of the accident. All but the lizard, who seemed too impressed to do anything else than sit there with her mouth open, eyes fixed on the ceiling of the room. "What do you know about this matter?" said the king to Alice. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing at all?" the king insisted. "Nothing at all," said Alice. "This is truly transcendent," said the king, addressing the jury. And the members of the jury were beginning to note this on their boards, when the White Rabbit hastily intervened. "Naturally, His Majesty has meant inconsequential," said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making signs of intelligence to the king as he spoke. "Inconsequential is what I meant," naturally the king hastened to say. And he began to mumble for himself, "Transcendent, inconsequential, transcendent, inconsequential," as if trying to decide which words sounded better. Part of the jury wrote transcendent, and another part wrote inconsequential. Alicia could see him, because he was close enough to the jury members to read their boards. "But this is not the least important," he said to himself. At this moment the king, who had been very busy writing something in his notebook, shouted, "Silence," and read in his notebook, Article 42. "Anyone who measures more than a kilometer will have to leave the room." All looked at Alice. "I am not a kilometer tall," Alicia protested. "You do measure it," said the king. "You are almost 2 kilometers tall," added the queen. "Well, I'm not going to move from here anyway," said Alicia. "And this article is worthless. You just invented it." "It is the oldest article in the whole book," said the king. "In that case, I should carry number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale, and hastily closed his notebook. "Consider your verdict," he ordered the jury in a weak and trembling voice. "There is still much to prove, with His Majesty's permission," said the White Rabbit, standing hastily. "This paper has just been found." "What does it say?" asked the Queen. "I have not yet opened it," answered the White Rabbit, "but it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to someone." "So it must be," the King nodded, "because otherwise it would have been written to no one, which is rare." "Who is it addressed to?" asked one of the members of the jury. "It is not addressed to anyone," said the White Rabbit. "There is nothing written on the outside." He unfolded the paper, while speaking, and added "Well, it's not really a letter, it's a series of verses." "Are they in the defendant's handwriting?" asked another member of the jury. "No, they are not," said the White Rabbit, and this is the strangest thing about all of this. All the members of the jury were perplexed. "He must have imitated someone else's handwriting," said the king. All the jurors breathed in relief. With the permission of His Majesty, said the valet, I have not written this paper, and no one can prove that I have done it, for there is no signature at the end of the paper. If you have not signed it, said the king, that only makes your guilt worse. You must have written it with bad intent, or else you would have signed your name like any other honest person. Unanimous applause followed these words. In fact, it was the first sensible thing the king had said all day. This proves his guilt, naturally exclaimed the queen. Therefore, cut him off. This proves nothing, protested Alice. So, we don't even know what's written on the paper. Read it, ordered the king to the White Rabbit. The White Rabbit put on his glasses. Where should I begin, with your Majesty's permission? He asked. Start at the beginning, said the king with gravity, and go on until you reach the end. There you stand. There was a deathly silence in the room, as the White Rabbit read the following verses. They said that you went to see her, and told him about me. She approved my character, and I did not learn to swim. He said I was not. We know it's true, but if she insisted, what could happen to you? I gave one, they two, you gave us three or more, all came back to you, and they were mine long ago. If she or I are perhaps mixed in this mess, he hopes you free them and be as at the beginning. It seems to me that you were, before her attack, between him and me, and that a cause of quarrel. Don't let him know that she loved them more, for it must be a secret and between you and me. This is the most important proof we have obtained so far, said the king, rubbing his hands. So, let the jury proceed to. If any of you are able to explain this gibberish to me, said Alice. She had grown so much in the last few minutes that she was not afraid to interrupt the king. I give him 6 pence. I am convinced that these verses have no feet or head. All the members of the jury wrote on their blackboards, she is convinced that these verses have no head or feet, but none of them dared to explain the content of the writing. If the poem is meaningless, said the king, that will save us many complications, because we won't have to look for it. And yet, he continued, leaning the paper on his knees and looking at it with gloomy eyes, I think I see some meaning. And I didn't learn to swim. You don't know how to swim, do you? He added, addressing the valet. The valet shook his head sadly. Do I look like I can swim? He said. Certainly not, since it was made entirely of cardboard. So far everything fits, the king observed, and continued to murmur to himself while examining the verses. Well, we know that it is true. Obviously refers to the jury. But if she insists, it has to be the queen. What could happen to you? What, indeed? I gave one, they two. Well, this must be what he did with the pies. But then all of them came back to you, observed Alicia. Sure, and here they are, the king triumphantly exclaimed, pointing to the cakes on the table. It's as clear as water. And later, before her attack. You never have attacks, do you, dear? He told the queen. Never. The furious queen roared, throwing a gun at the poor lizard. The unhappy lizard had already given up on writing with her finger on his blackboard, because she realized that it did not leave a mark, but now she hurried to start again, taking advantage of the ink that was dripping down her face, as long as she could. Then the words of the verse cannot attack you, said the king, looking around with a smile. There was a silence of death. It's a pun, the king had to explain with acrimony. And now everyone laughed. Let the jury consider its verdict, ordered the king, for the 100th time that day. No, no, protested the queen. First the sentence, the verdict later. Brave idiocy, exclaimed Alice, raising her voice. What an idea to ask for the sentence first. Shut up, cried the queen, turning purple. I don't want to, Alice said. Let her head be cut off. The queen screamed in a naked cry. No one moved. Who will listen? Said Alice. By this time she had grown to her normal height. You are all just a deck of cards. Hearing this, the deck rose up in the air and plunged into it. Alicia gave a little scream, half of fear and half of anger, and tried to get them off her. And she found herself lying on the bank, her head resting on her sister's skirt, who was lovingly taking from her face some dry leaves that had fallen from the trees. "Wake up now, Alice," her sister said to her. "How long you've slept." "Oh, I had such a strange dream," Alicia said. And he told his sister, as well as his memories aloud, all the amazing adventures we have been reading. And when he had finished, his sister gave him a kiss and said, "Really, it was a strange dream, darling. But now he runs to snack. It's getting late." So, Alice got up and ran away from there, and as she ran did not stop thinking of the wonderful dream she had. But her sister remained sitting there, just as Alice had left her, head resting on one hand, watching the sun set and thinking of little Alicia and her wonderful adventures. Until she too began to dream. And this was her dream. First, she dreamed in Alice herself, and it seemed to her again to feel the hands of the girl resting on her knees and see her eyes shining and curious fixed on her. He heard all the tones of his voice and saw the gesture with which he pulled away the hair that always fell before his eyes. And as she heard them, or imagined that she heard them, the space around her came to life and filled with the strange characters from her sister's dream. The tall grass shook at his feet as the white rabbit ran past. The frightened mouse splashed in a nearby pond. He could hear the jingle of porcelain cups while the March Hare and his friends continued that endless merriment, and the penetrating voice of the Queen ordering that the head be cut off to her guests. Again the baby piglet sneezed in the Duchess's arms, as plates and fountains crashed around him. Again the air was filled with the squeaks of the griffin, the creaking of the lizards. Chalk and the applause of the repressed guinea pigs, mixed with the distant sobbing of the false turtle. Alice's sister was sitting there, eyes closed, and almost thought she was in Wonderland too. But he knew that it was enough to open his eyes again to find himself in the boring reality. The grass would be stirred by the wind, and the splash of the pond would be due to the trembling of the reeds that grew on it. The tintinnure of the teacups would be transformed into the ringing of some bells, and the penetrating voice of the Queen in the cries of a shepherd. And the baby sneezing, the griffin squeaking, and all other mysterious noises would, she knew, become the confused rumor coming from a neighboring farm, as the distant flock of sheep replaced the false turtle's whimper. Finally, he imagined what his little sister would be like in the future, how Alicia would be when she became a woman. And he thought that Alice would keep, over the years, the same simple and enthusiastic heart of her childhood, and that she would gather around her other little ones, and make the eyes of the little ones shine by telling them a strange tale, perhaps this same dream of Wonderland that she had had years ago, and that Alice would feel the little sorrows and rejoice in the naive joys of the children, remembering her own childhood and the happy days of summer. And,